It starts with a simple question and ends in objective reality. Through our journey from there to here, we find one another and ourselves. And as the next 24 hours breaks free from our last, we gaze onward in reflection of the day.
Come to your own conclusions.
Just stay vigilant.
Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up.
Saturday, January 3rd, 2025. 26. Thank you for joining me today. Obviously, quite a big day for news. It's a little bit unreal just because of how obvious and how on the surface, I mean, what it is, but how contradictory it is to what was promised to his core people and how many of them rather, are screaming about that right now. And yet, nonetheless, you get this weird dynamic on the conversation in social media where anyone who disagrees is now no longer part of the team or never was MAGA or the rhinos. Same thing you saw with Kirk and plenty of other conversations where they say, or Epstein. He famously said, if you think this, then you're not really Republican. And moment by moment, that is pushing people who are honest, who are just maybe trying to hold on away from that two-party illusion, from the political dynamic. So if you haven't been paying attention, Donald Trump, his administration, the United States government has illegally, for not the first time, attacked Venezuela, illegally arrested Maduro. And we're going to get into the terms being used and the way it's being framed. There's no legal way to call this an arrest, but that's what we're going to discuss it as today, because there's no legal mechanism through which this should have happened the way that it did. Now, you could argue that it should have happened, that he's a bad guy, that he deserves to be, but you have to acknowledge what they did was illegal. It's just, this is the frustrating part of the conversation for honest people out there who maybe don't even have an opinion, just want to engage with the information honestly, and you get just buried in absolute nonsense. We have a lot to cover today. It's probably going to be another long show. We're going to start with a point about specifically some censorship overlap that I think is important. That all of this relates to the main two Venezuela, but also just a larger point behind a lot of this. But I want to talk about some of these points in regard to the in the current administration and how this is playing out around censorship. It very much plays a factor to the fever pitch of the conversation right now. I want to make a quick point about the supposed FBI, the FBI arrest, the supposed, I was going to say the entrapment, then I screwed that up. The entrapment of a young, I think he's over 18, but somebody in regard to another ISIS-inspired attack on New Year's Eve, which I looked into it a little bit and saw all the typical hallmarks. Haven't got a chance to dive too deep, but simply just commented I highly doubt it when they say that what they claimed it was. And surprise, surprise, the information is almost more ridiculous than you might think. And we'll go through that and how that does connect in interesting ways to a lot of what we're talking about. But also another point back to the Somalia conversation and the daycare kit, which if James Lee just did a video about it, it's exactly what we talked about. Now, remember, there is fraud that has taken place. In fact, a lot of arrests were taking place during Biden's administration, interestingly enough, not from Trump. Interestingly enough, doesn't mean that won't happen. But the story is very clearly, as even James Lee will refer to it, as a psyop. Coming from Israel, that's been admitted. It's just a very interesting overlap. Not to say that there's not fraud, and especially not to say that the government's not involved, left or right. I think the answer is they are in every possible way, not necessarily every individual. But it's important to be understand that there is fraud, criminal activity, but what they're using to distract you with or trying to make it a hyper focus was, I argued, and I'll point this out again, to take away from a larger awareness that was developing just around the uncomfortable, rather the American people are unhappy, very much so. And it's coming out everywhere. And you get the typical team players trying to kind of keep that under wraps. No, that's just angry Democrats. It's just falling apart right now. We're also going to talk about the larger point quickly about the peace president idea, but we're going to discuss Venezuela, just clumsy way that this went down. And it feels almost like in my gut tells me that Trump in a way got played, and we'll get into that. But we're going to start with the update on the Iran regime change effort, which is very transparent. And as even Mike Pompeo tweeted about, and we showed you in the last show, Israel made a point to say we had Mossad agents on the ground. And Mike Pompeo made a point to reiterate that. I mean, I don't know how else like I said before, it becomes even if we do what in anybody else's actions would be illegal, it's okay because we're fighting the bad guy or the bad group or the bad president or bad country. That's exactly what the partisanship does today. Everything means everything except when we want that to happen because they're bad or they're on the wrong side or they have the wrong ideas. But freedom of ideology, it never stops. We're going to talk about that and how that overlaps very clearly in a very expected way, but it's just, again, very clumsy and in your face of Reza Pahlavi or the MEK or these different groups going, hey, good job, Venezuela, we're on the same team, and overlapping with Israel points. But all of that in a larger point that I'm going to end with that I think is important as well, of where this all seems to kind of be collecting around. But a couple of points that I wanted you to see before we get started or as we get started that I think are interesting. One, unrelated, I just thought this was interesting. Derek just showed me this because we often talk about how, I'm very aware that this platform, I'm very honored to be running this platform where we're at a position that is unique. And I think it's because we're kind of on I guess we started in a time where things were different. I don't think censorship was as algorithmically controlled as we see today. My point is that we definitely garnered a lot of independent, organic support of people that were hungry for something different. And I think we've kind of worked our way with that into a place where we've kind of stalled and a lot of people are being suppressed and held back. And like I said, where I don't think there's really organic reach anymore. But that being said, we still have organic people and the spread and telling your neighbors and sharing information. And that has its own kind of growth. Maybe it doesn't show in the numbers on videos or anything else, which I've never really cared about. It represents in the continued growth of our work and the people we talk to and the amount of support we get from you. But my point was that we can see in a lot of ways between the lines that we're far, far, far more influential and more, just large as a platform than they want people to necessarily acknowledge. This was one of those points. I was actually surprised to find this out. Derek showed me this global rank according to Listen Notes, which I'm not even sure what their rank is in regard to, whether they're regarded as something that would be honest that they would be accurate, I guess. But top 1%, the global rank for the Last American Vagabond podcast, the top 1%. I think that seems a little bit high, but I'm glad to hear that if that's real. But the point is simply to relay, guys, that what we're doing is making a difference as always because of you, because of your support, and because of the work we continue to do. And I just think that's worth acknowledging, even though they don't want people to see that, and they definitely don't want us to know that. So congratulations to all of us. Now, a couple points to start with. These will be seen again in the show, but I just wanted to make sure you saw this out in the beginning. This one's just really referencing what Massey pointed to and making a larger point that I've made before, but especially today, I want you to think about and we talk about, but think about this in a larger sense every day with what you deal with on platforms you're engaging with. So Massey simply points out, which we'll come back to when we get to Venezuela, the 25-page indictment that they put out about Maduro has zero mention about fentanyl or stolen oil. So that's the point. The indictment's supposed to be this is the criminal activity they conducted. This is what the argument is. It has nothing to do with what they claimed. And you don't need any kind of a special lens to be able to see that. It's very clear. The usual people will gaslight the way they do, but honest people need to step back and go, come on. Okay, what's really happening here? Is it just Israel's interest? Is it something larger? Rare earth minerals, lithium, gold, oil, maybe all of it? I think yes, in a general sense. But it's just simply that he'll throw out whatever narrative he can. Fentanyl never really made sense. The evidence immediately showed that, but they just kept it going anyway. So he says, search it for yourself, which I'll give you the link you can check out. On top of the idea that it's an indictment from a government that's clearly corrupt, left and right, but the idea that your U.S. indictment would somehow have any standing in the world, it's crazy the way they're running this because they very much see themselves as globalist enforcers. And they not want to use that word. Trump famously said in his first administration, we don't want to be the policeman of the world. He said that because he knew we didn't want that. Still does it, like they all do. That's why the definition of the globalist point yesterday. They always make it about some woke thing or Democrats or whatever they want to frame it as. It's a very simple understanding of one power influencing, governing, dictating policy from a global standpoint. It's exactly what they're involved with, exactly what they're doing right now. So I simply said, in a larger way, this is where I think we are. We are at a point right now where it is simply honest people against those that are willing to lie for the team or for their own benefit. And I'm likely both. So think about that in the sense that it's not like, I'm sure there's somebody in a corner somewhere that's never even considered this information. That being considered, that in the conversation we're having of people that care, which is, I think most people are watching some news or seeing these stories, is that right now, if you simply take the smallest moment to look at information, not narratives, not social media posts, but information that you can verify for yourself, and sometimes that is quite limited. But if you look at that, we can prove right now in almost every single story we're covering that they're lying about one thing or another. And it just kind of falls by the wayside, at least in the mainstream conversation. So we're at a point where you have honest people who in some cases will fight for the team or pull punches, but at the end of the day, their prices are going up. They're not getting what they're promised. Epstein people are not being arrested. And at some point, there's a line there, which we're seeing very clearly right now. So we're at a point where we're dealing with people who care, are honest, versus people who are choosing to ignore the truth for many reasons. And that has to be, I'd like to believe that that's a small minority in regard to people that are just lying for their team, but it gets shown as the bigger picture. They all have 10 million followers and they all control large audiences. And that's how that tends to work. But I said that seems to be the simple breakdown of just about every agenda playing out right now. It's all just so embarrassingly obvious. I know anybody I talk to, anyway, it just seems obvious. And that's what's so funny is that we're at a point where these things are, I keep saying this over the years. Somebody needs to write a book from a psychological perspective about what the hell is going on, really COVID forward, because it's wild to me. People like this, for example, and again, this is one of the opening points we'll come back to because there's a whole bunch of these, but here's Alex Jones doing his job like all the rest of them. Elon Musk doing his algorithm thing, going, this is true, and just pointing to anything he wants, here, correct, this 100%. He says, millions of Venezuelans flood the streets of Caracas and other major cities in celebration. Can you guess what happened? Oops, actually, that's 18 months old. Sorry, Jones. This constantly continues to happen. They're showing old information. Now, you could argue, if you're framing this as people don't like the government in Venezuela, that might be one thing. He's saying this is happening because he was ousted. That's not true. Did Jones care to even look? Or does he just know that my job, or at least what I want to do, is send this narrative? So you seek out what you want to find. That's not journalism, guys. That's propaganda. This is what they do every single day. And yet, how often we find these kind of things, and it's not just because this says it. You can look for yourself. You can cross-reference it. You can reverse image search it. People like this, Alex Jones and the rest of them, are viciously lying to you on a regular basis. Half the time, I'm of the mind that they don't even know they're being just misled and how they don't really care, like with Trump. But plenty more to get to. On that note as well, one thing I really wanted you to see before we get into it all, and it's buried in a 3-hour show. I didn't go looking for this because for me, I didn't even expect it to be this clear. And to be clear, this is also just sort of a tangential point. This could very well, the entire thing could be very well a byproduct, meaning that maybe the U.S. has an interest which we know has had interest in overthrowing Venezuela for a really long time, maybe because of their own interest, maybe because of resources, maybe because Israel wants that. And then just as a byproduct, you have the Pronomos capital charter city dynamic where they go, hey, we can take advantage of that, right? Oh, you're going to regime change Honduras? Let us get involved. We can use this location. Or it could be the one driving it. I'm not claiming to know for sure, but I think it's worth considering, seeing as how Jenny Cohen points out that in 2019, Mark Lutter, whose nonprofit received lots of money from Peter Thiel and their backed Emergent Ventures in 2018, said, quote, we're putting out a white paper looking at Venezuela, assuming this transfer of power does go through. Guys, this is the idea that they're talking about. If we can get control, like in Honduras, like we just saw them do, like in every other place, like in Bolivia, like everywhere we've seen, you can prove that they are, at the very least, doing what they would criticize as election interference. At the worst, absolutely breaking, manipulating, lying, cheating, and stealing, assassinating, arresting to get what they want in these locations. So this is simply pointing out that you have an overlap already where they're going, hey, we can use that. If the power transfer goes through, the illegal dynamic, the regime change, the coup, then we can take advantage. And it says if you can get charter cities to be a part of the conversation, there's an opportunity. Just think about how ridiculous and obvious this all is. We're going to point this out again as we get down toward the other part of the story. The team trying to end poverty by founding well-governed charter cities. So, and you could even argue that maybe there's good intentions, but at the end of the day, it is taking advantage of dishonesty and illegal actions by governments to carry out your vision that the people of Venezuela don't want, or Honduras, or anywhere else we're talking about. It's pretty wild. Now, I'll include these again. These are the articles that Pronomos Capital, the rapid transition to a techno-feudal state, which, by the way, you can quite literally prove very easily that Pronomos Capital is the primary funding mechanism for most of these things, including Freedom Cities, including Prospera, and that's very much Peter Thiel and very much a lot of the people around him, Andreessen. But yet you get this weird pushback like, that's overblown. Like Alex Jones, Palantir is this small Democrat thing. There's a lot of that out there. And this one, the network state coup and the engineered transition to tech Zionism, as it's called in their own conversations. Okay, let's start. We'll come back to some of those things where they point about censorship, a point about the team, and where this seems to be coming from, and obviously now that we're in the midst of a very contentious conversation, how it's being applied. So this is MAGA Voice saying, breaking, Elon Musk confirms he's going all in to fund Republicans in midterms to help Trump. The best friends are back. Like it's some sitcom. Well, guess what, guys? He never left. If you ever pretended like there was ever really, I mean, it was even discussed within Congress or even in the court of law that he was technically not actually removed from the administration, whether he stepped aside or not. That was very clearly, it didn't get discussed in the mainstream or the mainstream alternative where which they pretend is the whole conversation every single time, but it very much was a part of that. So he's now simply stepping back into the light, which I honestly think he pulled himself away because he was so focused on that it was ruining a lot of stuff. The people were overcritical, that they were and the way he conducted himself was very embarrassing in a lot of ways, getting caught censoring. It's obvious. But so this is about him, and you can watch the video if you want, seeing how Twitter wants. Oh, there it goes. It's just Trump going, and Elon Musk, and he's getting half booed, half clapped in Congress. And this is just funny. AG Trader says, or points to this in another post. He says, like, funny, now this doesn't matter anymore. Time to drop the really big bomb. Elon Musk said, Donald Trump is in the Epstein files. That's the real reason they have not been made public. Have a nice day. Oh, again. So either Elon Musk lied about that because he's a petty person, or he was being honest because he's a petty person. And in the beginning, that means he hid that because he didn't care. But now it doesn't matter anymore, apparently. And this person says, cherry on top. Elon Musk forms his own political party, the America Party, right? Today, the America Party formed to give you back your freedom, as he was criticizing the left-right paradigm. Oh, no, not done with that. That was all noise. Let's get right back into Republican stuff and pretend that everything works out. I mean, you can't make sense of these things without realizing he's either grifting over here or grifting over there. It's just wild. So on that note, talking about Elon Musk and censorship and, pretending to be a part, but now coming back to the team in the fold. This is the same point, saying all of a sudden he's not in the files anymore. Oh, maybe this one I was thinking of. Just the funny part is Elon Musk comes out and goes, congratulations, Trump, a win for the world, as he illegally arrests Maduro, even though the people voted him into power and they lied about that and all the different dynamics. And even though people will lie, you can prove these things like I started with. And even right now, I'm sure one of them in the chat, screeching about how that's just Democrat stuff. No, those are simply facts. You can look it up for yourself or ask the hundreds of international observers that identified the reality despite narrative coming from the U.S. government like every other time. But he says, congratulations for your illegal regime change, but now the files don't matter. On top of that, Keith Edwards points something out, and this is the point about censorship that I think is interesting, timely. Elon Musk has appeared to have paused, which I don't think is pause is the right word, but paused Grok because, and we've seen that before. He did that in South Africa. He did that during the last Venezuela lie. He's done it more than once. He says, because it keeps calling Trump a pedophile and Netanyahu a war criminal. Now, that's actually true, by the way, but not the way it sounds. He says, is this true? Or American muckrakers ask Grok, and it says, no, that's not true. There's no evidence of me being paused. Now you overfocus on that word and you can act like that's actually honest, but it's not. And I'll show you why. And don't make the unsubstantiated claims like that. That's Grok reprimanding. Well, asking Grok, I said, why did he say this about pausing it? And he goes on to make a point about how what has been happening, right? People have been going, compare, here's Khamenei and here's Netanyahu. Now remove the war criminal from the picture. And guess what happened? Well, I'll come back to it. They removed Netanyahu. And when asked why, he said, because Netanyahu's a war criminal. That was Grok, or Grok did. And it goes over those points right there. Says this is what he was referring to. Then I asked, well, were there any actions by Elon or the Twitter team after all this came out? And guess what, guys? Quite literally, it says there is evidence of ongoing efforts to address the issue. On January 2nd, 2026, an XAI employee posted on Twitter that the team was, quote, looking into further tightening Grok's guardrails, indicating internal action to mitigate the generation of inappropriate content. Now, this is another point, which I don't want to get too far into. It's worth a deeper conversation. There's so much to talk about today of this interesting overlap of Grok and people going, like taking an image of a underage girl online or a star that's underage or whatever it is and saying, now make that image with her with no clothes on or whatever. Now, I don't think it was like that, but like skimpy clothes or something. And it does it. Now, it's an interesting conversation to be had because obviously just from a gut reaction point, it's like, well, that shouldn't be happening, right? That seems wrong for them. But then when you really stand back, and I agree, that's what I would think, or rather, that's what my feeling would be. But if you stand back in a principled way and, take the reality of it, okay, what if I said, Grok, make up an image of a young girl or a girl or anybody, and make it in skimpy clothing, and it just happened to be identically looking to somebody who exists in the world? Would that then be my fault? Even though I didn't ask for it, would it be Grok's fault? Or is it just we dismiss it because it's still the same point, isn't it? Or the idea that this is not actually a person. This is an image that's been altered or recreated. So it's a whole interesting thing. Now, my point would still be that I think that this is why this stuff is a problem. And I would side with the rights of the individual in regard to those images being there, but at the same time, being able to ask it. But the point comes down to, I think all of this is being created in order to justify more suppression, censorship, but in a way that's going to feel right to people who are not usually calling for it, if you get my meaning behind that. And so all of that was one part of it too. So they did step in and they did alter these things. And I can prove it to you. You know why? Because Grok deleted the tweet. And that's crazy to me. So this person says, hey, Grok, remove the picture of the war criminal. And as you all, I'm sure, saw, Grok deleted Netanyahu and then asked point blank, why did you do that? He says the request was to remove the war criminal. Netanyahu was arrest warrants, and Khomeini does not. But yet they still, which means I guarantee, my opinion, Elon Musk's team, XAI, goes get that out of there. Now, what else can that mean other than we're hiding this because it makes Netanyahu look bad? It's not a crime. It's not a young girl. This was all overlapped, I think, to make this happen. And it's about censorship and control. But nonetheless, I do want to revisit that point because it opens up an interesting door to what it means to be in that technological age. This is why I don't think these things should be happening at all, quite frankly. But no, yes, I didn't mean to say he, or it's just a reactionary thing. But clearly, that's an important thing, I think. Now, continuing, Elon Musk. This says, Elon Musk has warned that anyone using Grok to create illegal content. Now, this is supposed to be about that point, about the young girl and the, making it look skimpy. Okay. And says, or Twitter to post illegal content will face consequences, which, by the way, is just flatly not true, seeing as how they've ignored tons of that stuff on people like Loomer, for example, who does everything she criticizes, or Elon, for that matter. These people are hypocrites. But the narrative is out there. And it says anyone using Grok to make illegal content will suffer the same consequences if they upload illegal content. Well, wait a minute. What if you ask Grok to do it and that comes out and you didn't ask for what they produce? It's already out there. Whose fault is that? This is not going to be anything other than a justification to censor you. And he says, we're not kidding. Yeah, I'm sure you're not. But it's not, what they're doing is not honest. Now, on that same overlapping point, guess what's happening simultaneously and totally not involved, or rather not in the same vein of conversation? It is. I'm being facetious. Rich Barris, People's Pundit, says this is really bad. And you've seen this clip. This is not new. He might have thought it was because it's going around again. But he says this is unless I'm mistaken, and this is a new exact setup. I believe it's a video from when they had that press conference with all the, or rather the little meeting with all the influencers. Either way, this is something he said before. He says, this is a foreign leader talking openly about influencing our politics and restricting God-given rights enshrined in our Bill of Rights. They don't get it. Just one more example of an aging regime leaving the world a worse place. No cavalry is coming. It says Netanyahu talks how he wants to control all of the media and social media in America so he can end a First Amendment. And this gets even more specific, by the way. Here's two examples. This guy, I believe, is running for governor of Florida, or maybe he already is. He's the lieutenant governor. I believe he's running. It says for a higher position. You don't have the right to harm other people with your words, he says. Yeah, you actually do, by the way, but this is supposedly the people fighting for free speech, fighting for constitutional rights. This is dangerous. And this is I don't think this is even honest. I don't believe this person actually thinks something like this. If this was Biden doing it, they'd probably criticize it. The next clip will make it even more clear, I think. But Netanyahu saying that, I think we know where this is coming from. Here's what he actually said.
Have the right to harm other people with your words, and you don't have the right to say things that have really negative, really horrible meanings. When you want people to destroy Israel, that matters.
Okay. He actually said you can't say things that have bad meanings. What could be more completely up in the air than that? It's completely subjective. You could make points about any, and then of course it's about, you can't criticize Israel. Yes, you can, man. I can say anything I want about Israel. I can say anything I want about Jewish people. I can say anything I want about Christians. The idea that you guys try to carve this out and it's just ignorant or dishonest. It's simply not correct. It's not constitutionally accurate. Here they are telling you we need to change the First Amendment because you can't just say mean things. How is that different in a material sense than a Democrat? rather the team sport Democrats we're talking about, not every single liberal that's out there, because most of them, in my experience, don't believe you should be flatly censored for everything, but may have a feeling that certain mean things shouldn't be allowed. Same point, though. Right? My point is to make it all or nothing is never accurate. And on top of that, there's plenty of liberals that I know that very much don't believe censorship should exist. It's just, this is, as always, this does not represent most people today, and that's the whole thing they're worried about. And then Mel actually said, yes, I do, Jay. I absolutely do. Full stop. God gave me that right, and only God can take it away. Dude had one private meeting with Benjamin Netanyahu, and now he's got a full-blown God complex. Well, guess what? Here's another one. This one is on NBC. Israeli cybersecurity billionaire Shlomo Kramer says it's time to limit the First Amendment. Now, this is one of the oldest conversations, guys. This has been going around forever. We've talked about this. I bring up Elizabeth Schumann again every time. She sits in front of Congress during Trump's first administration and says, we see it building and we just don't know how to stop it. She was talking about MAGA threats and terrorism, or rather whatever they were calling that, which is people with red hats. Oh, of course, let's be real. On both sides of it, there are plenty of extremely crazy people. But what her point is, well, they're not breaking the law. So she wasn't talking about them. She's talking about the average people out there who are going, are wink, wink, saying this and mean that. And it's a bad thing because it leads to this. And so we have to do something because they're acting within their rights. And her argument essentially was to remove those rights. The barriers to those rights are the barriers that protect those rights. Here is what he's calling for. And this is not mincing words.
It's difficult to hear, but it's time to limit the First Amendment in order to protect it. And quickly before it's too late.
What do you mean?
I mean that we need to control the platforms, all the social platforms. We need to stack rank the authenticity of every person that expresses themselves online.
You know, unless they're Israeli bots and being used to control your information. Those are okay, though.
And take control over what they are saying based on that ranking.
The government.
The government should
control the social media.
Yeah.
Take control of what they're saying. I mean, this is like, clearly, this is not even meant. This is absolutely on its face. And if you were to come out and say that that's what they want, that, you know, anybody, the government, Zionists, the UK, anybody saying that they want to control what you say, you're not, they'd be like, you're crazy. That's insane. It's right on the surface. Now, who's to say if that's resonating with people on the channel or anywhere else? But guys, it is on there. This is coming out right now, and they're using all of these conversations, and it's still completely tailored around Israel's interests, like everything we're talking about today. Mel points out, I honestly thought this was an exaggeration. It's not. Republicans in New York are literally trying to pass a new law to protect it's in quotes pro-Israel print, as in flyers. And you could read it for yourself. You go into further detail. It's not hard to look up. Now, it hasn't happened yet, but they're trying to make it illegal for you to take down a flyer, for example, that says something good about Israel. Or it's just, even if you think that like makes sense in like a more any possible way, it's illegal. It's unconstitutional. It's just insane. You're creating a situation where you can then argue. I mean, on top of the fact that it's carved out for only one group of people, isn't that literally racism? I just think this is so beyond the pale, guys. Everything like this is happening right now, and it's not happening under Democrats. I mean, it was, to be clear. It's just right now it's happening under Trump's administration, the Republicans. It's all the same. And I'll play just the beginning of this, let's not forget what Trump's Bondi was literally saying right after Charlie Kirk's assassination, using his name to push something he quite literally said the opposite about. This is my point at the beginning about being so obvious that it's embarrassing. And yet we have to pretend like we're debating, like you get pushed back online. These things are in your face. One of these things should have been enough for everyone to go, okay, these guys are not honest. Okay, they're lying to us. And it did, I think, for a lot of people, but not the usual grifters.
Free speech, and then there's hate speech. And there is no place, especially now, especially after what happened to Charlie, in our society.
My position is that even hate speech should be completely and totally allowed in our country. The most disgusting speech should absolutely.
Yeah, I really just want to play the part where she says that. Oh, and by the way, for those that were watching the last show, for whatever reason, my videos are uploading fine. And there's no problem from last time. I am still dealing with the audio issue, so that's why I couldn't hear where I stopped right there. But no worries. For those that don't know what I'm talking about, irrelevant for today. So, hate speech versus Bondi's versus Charlie Kirk, and it's about hate speech. I mean, that is exactly the point about the Democrat conversation. Okay, that being discussed, important to understand that there is an obvious effort. Now, that was just meant to be quick. I could have brought up probably 15 more examples of people in prominent positions on the Republican side saying we need to control speech because Israel. It's very clear. Like, I don't mean like saying it like I just showed you explicitly, not kind of like I said, mincing words. And that shows you something, guys. This shows you an escalation of the agenda because, as we keep seeing, they've lost control. So what can you do? You buy media groups. You shut people down. You censor. You control language. That's what they're all doing. Both sides of the paradigm. Okay, so let's talk about the FBI and this ISIS-inspired attack. Now, for all we know, this in and of itself is an additional part to this agenda, but something tells me, I just wanted to make sure we address this quickly, that this is, I mean, whether it's Kash Patel desperately trying to make himself look relevant or just a continuation of the same FBI type illegitimate policy, or that it's part of some larger thing that we're going to see play out. It's wild to me how they can't even, like, I would argue you could put in more effort and make this a little bit more sound. But here's what this is what I first saw from Fox News. FBI disrupts alleged ISIS-inspired New Year's Eve attack. Even the way Fox News frames that as FBI just disrupts alleged, usually they're far more like whatever the FBI said. That says something to me. But another plot targeting a grocery store in North Carolina, of course. Don't forget the overlap of the whole, the beginning of the Azov movement march and they shall not replace us. The whole thing started with the Azov movement, Israel-funded, U.S. CIA-funded march of the Azov movement through Charlottesville. And that this is an important overlap to understand how all of this kind of conversation got kicked off. A funded group that is not what they believe, what they claim to be. And that was used to say Republicans are terrorists and racists. And now they're the ones pushing the same thing. Doesn't really line up, does it? But here's the article. Mint Hill man allegedly planned New Year's Eve terrorist attack. Now, I'm just quickly going to give you some information, but I'm going to probably get into this more as it develops, and we'll see what happens in court. But it's interesting to see, the overlapping story is very simple. It's the same idea that this guy was being taken advantage of. It seems he has a mental capacity issue. And they ultimately tried to, the argument is he was going to use knives and hammers to go attack people in a store. It's like, let's just even say that's exactly what he was planning. How in the world is that an ISIS-inspired attack? They claim it's because he was sending financial stuff and supporting him on websites. Guess what we have yet to see of any of the last claims of the supposed Halloween plot, which I keep telling you, if you care to look into it, it seems to have completely stalled. And what they claim is that all the stuff about ISIS connections has never been verified. Or the Dallas shooting point I kept telling you about. They were screaming about those 2 Antifa members that were tied to terrorism. They've both been let go. There's no further charges. It's over. And it was the one guy who shot and apparently shot himself. It's what I said in the beginning. It was somebody who took action, who knows whether he's involved with something more, whether he was actually killed. We should question these things. But they immediately made it about anyone else that was there, about a network, because that's what Trump was focused on. And yet that went away. There was nothing there. And yet we never seem to be able to refocus on those, not even the corporate media. Why wouldn't the left be screaming about that? Think about that for a second, because the agenda is clearly nonpartisan. But so this is a similar dynamic, and I think it's similar to this, which I've showed you before. Parents catch FBI and plot to force mentally ill son to be a right-wing terrorist. It's actually, the way that even the title sounds, people go, oh, that seems like a propaganda. It's very easy to look up, and it's very clear. The parents caught them. It was a whole thing. And the kid was mentally challenged. They were basically trying to trick him into doing something, and the kid was he just wanted somebody to be friends with him. That seems to be something they do all the time. There's somebody who, in many cases, are just going, yes, I'll tell them whatever they want to hear because they're so happy they finally have somebody who wants to be their friend. I mean, it's not every case, but I've seen at least 2 cases like that, where this is the parents telling you this, that they don't have any friends, and suddenly he finds a friend. He was so happy, and then they slowly start going, hey, what about these videos? You like this website? And he just goes along with it. And then at the end of the day, he goes, no, I don't want to do the bad thing you keep proposing, even though he's been saying he did. And they arrest him and say they were about to do it. I'm not making this up. And I mean, it's so wild how often this happens. The Intercept, even the New York Times has written about this before. Now you've got Kash at the helm, and that's why I think it's even more ridiculous. A Mint Hill teenager was arrested this week for allegedly planning a New Year's Eve terrorist attack at a grocery store in Charlotte area, officers announced Friday. Authorities arrested 18-year-old Cristian Studevant on New Year's Eve, December 31st. After a weeks-long investigation, really put the work in, allegedly uncovering details of a very well-planned terrorist attack in Mint Hill. But the planned part came from you guys, as far as I can tell. That's usually how that goes. No such attack was carried out. Sturdivant was accused of crafting a plan to attack people with hammers and knives at a grocery store and the fast food restaurant in Mint Hill on New Year's Eve in support of ISIS. Okay. Like, that doesn't even make sense. Like, why would that support ISIS? Because they hate our freedom. Yeah, we're still playing that game, guys. Of course, I'm not even going to get into the absurdity of not recognizing that ISIS is literally a cultivated psychological operation by Western powers in Israel. It's not something you should even be pushing back on. It should be like knowing it's Tuesday. It's provable and obvious, and it's been coming out left and right. It is, and I mean, right now, as I've showed you a million times, Israel's working with ISIS in Gaza. They're working with ISIS in Saudi Arabia and Yemen. It's provable. Or Al-Qaeda, or Hayat al-Sham is quite literally running Syria. It's just ridiculous that we can't be honest about this. And then yet, but they're supporting ISIS. Get them. As your guys are funding ISIS. You know, it doesn't make any sense. He wasn't targeting one specific grocery store, it says, but was eyeing several and planned to attack wherever the most people were. So basically, we had no details, but it would have happened wherever it was bad. Just trust us. Officials said at press conferences on the 2nd. Sturdivant allegedly pledged his allegiance to ISIS. Like, wouldn't that be the first thing you would prove to people? If that's the case, then demonstrate that. Maybe it did happen, guys. And if it did happen, we should ask whether he was basically coerced into it, which has happened before, because of people like this going, come on, just do it. We don't care. It's just a joke, you know, and he does it, and then they arrest him. Now, there's an example on, it was I think it might have been New Year's Eve, actually. It was post-Christmas. There was a mentally challenged guy that was going to be using these toy cars to roll out at this parade. And the whole thing didn't happen. Everything was provided, the cars, the explosives, by the FBI. And ultimately, he said no at the end of the day. And they arrested him anyway, charged him with a thing that didn't happen. And the only part of the story was that he was talking to them about it, agreed, but then ultimately said no. So wouldn't that not be a crime? That's the kind of stuff we always talk about. Now, it says he had interacted with ISIS online in the past. Okay, so you're watching him interact with ISIS, but you're not arresting the ISIS member that you can prove he's talking to? That sure makes sense, doesn't it? Officials said Sturdivant planned the attack for about a year. How does that make sense? If you weeks-long investigation that you initiated, the whole plan, you can find this out the deeper you look, but yet he's been planning what you brought to him for a year, but it's a weeks-long investigation. And it says countless lives were saved. Possibly. Sturdivant, a Mint Hill resident, allegedly shared his attack plans online with a person who he believed was a member of ISIS, who was actually an FBI agent. Okay. So maybe he didn't think it was an ISIS agent. Maybe he knew that it wasn't true. Maybe, you know what I mean? Like, it's just, this becomes so flimsy, especially with the history. So we will be touching on this again. Now, I'm not going to play this for time. It's about 3 minutes. It's just basically a recitation of what recitation of what we just pointed out. But this, of course, is not cash this time, because I think we know why. I think he's maybe not enjoying being in the service anymore. But here's some overlapping points that I think are very relevant. Now, this one is from Steve Friend, not familiar. Just followed him with these posts. It says the FBI groomed a 21-year-old idiot to send them $40 in Bitcoin when he wouldn't agree to build a bomb. They conned him into delivering nail polish remover as a bomb component. Because remember, the point was it was a bomb attack, but then it turned into attack people with hammers and a knife. Or was it a hammer and whatever the other term was? But if it started with you trying to get him to build a bomb, and you had to basically devolve into, well, hitting people with a hammer, then that means that you're desperate to, I mean, that kid clearly, to me, with what we can see right now, and as always, maybe there's more information that will change it. But as it stands, how do we take that as anything other than them so desperate to make something happen that they just move away from the bomb that they were forcing and go, well, hammers then. Hammers at a grocery store? FBI, it says Director Kash Patel promised to end these entrapments, which he did. Another lie. And here's another post he made. He says the complaint alleges that Sturdivant lived with a relative who secured knives and hammers away so Sturdivant could not use them for harm. That's their quote. Meaning, as they rightly point out, this means the FBI targeted and groomed a mentally vulnerable person whose guardians had to hide hammers from him. Probably why they just went with the hammer then. Not a joke, by the way. Think about how ridiculous this is. Now, realize my point is, even if this is exactly what happened and this guy was willing to do this, the way that they've conducted this is ridiculous. And Ken Silva says, on the Fed's radar since he was 14 years old. Make sense of that. So he's been planning this for a year, weeks-long investigation. But since you've been watching him since he was 14, investigators believe that Mr. Sturtevant had been radicalized online as a teenager and had first appeared on the radar of the federal investigators in 2022. Since he was 14 years old, in case I said that wrong. These things continually, as much as it shouldn't, they kind of just baffle me. Like, it feels like it gets worse, like less fleshed out every single time. Now, as I said, we will be talking about this more. I'll include this article from Matt Agris, the Free Thought Project, which you should be checking out. They do great work, and just read through it. It'll probably blow your mind. I'll include my FBI tag in general. I don't want to just, there's so many tabs today. There's a bunch in here about these conversations that go back a long way. This one comes around in regard to the more arrested for the FBI ISIS link plot for Halloween. We talk about the January 6th conversation, which has recently pivoted into some random guy that doesn't need any of the evidence. They're doing a great job out there, guys. Massey called that up, by the way. So overlapping this point, let's talk about the Somalia discussion around the fraud conversation, around can connect to the larger point, but really just that I wanted to reiterate the point they made in the last show about this. So General Flynn comes out and says, please tell me why I or anyone should pay taxes. Because you have to realize that, people have talked about this forever, people in our field, and it always comes around that it's like, be careful with this conversation, because realistically, we know that they will enforce it with a gun. Even if we understand that, for example, the IRS is an illegitimate institution and it's illegal according to people that work there. The idea is that it's always been something that it's very sensitive because it's an important point for the government. And you're almost a terrorist. And here suddenly everyone's making this point. Marjorie Taylor Greene, General Flynn, all these. And look, I'm glad. I think this is more, like I said, cut to the chase. I think this is a organic awakening to a bigger problem. That Americans, as I said in the title yesterday, are very rapidly starting to see many big problems. The two-party illusion itself, their teams lying to them, that we're being robbed for war, this big things they're seeing. And then it got co-opted by things like this. And then even further got co-opted into just the Somali conversation daycare point, which is basically a psyop. So I think that's why this is being said. He says, we are now potentially over $1 trillion stolen by corrupt politicians. Yeah, you mean the ones currently in power, many of which were actually involved with previous, or Trump's administration from the last time. If you're saying this is the case, which that debt has been increased by nobody more than Trump in this administration, and more last time, and Biden before that or after that, but now more than ever because of what's going on. So when he makes this point and then doesn't make it clear, or really tries to make the point about Donald Trump, sir, we need to hear from you. It's insane. You're basically saying the person that's robbing us, please help us. But you see, this is propaganda to me. And the idea being that you start with this tax point. I feel like this is very clearly a coordinated thing. But he goes, we're $1 trillion stolen by corrupt politicians and their illegal cronies in numerous states. Yeah, exactly. That allow children learning centers. This is remember, this whole thing about the Somali daycare center. Now, if you didn't hear the beginning and didn't see the last show, there is corruption. That's been very clearly highlighted by I think, even numerous administrations, but at the very least in Biden's last administration, they arrested and charged many people, 70-something. This section of it possibly has not really been verified. There's nothing. Nick Shirley and this weird dynamic is completely cultivated. And it's been focused specifically on very small things. Not small in the sense of just, that it's not a crime if that is happening, but the reality being that the bigger picture should be huge, which would include these points too. But it's over-focused, and then it becomes about Ilhan Omar and Walls, even though they're never going to actually arrest those people, even though I think they probably should. That's always how this goes. It becomes that random person. So that's what he's referring to. That's the point. You're talking about the specific one point about that, and that's why we're $1 trillion of debt. Maybe you should speak to Catherine Austin Fitts and understand. I know he knows that's not true. And he goes, and other money-sucking criminal child care and medical support chop shops. To be clear, yes, we should care about anything like that if you can prove that this is happening and that it's being facilitated by your government. But he goes, Donald Trump, please, we need to hear from you. Leaving this up to the DOJ is not going to be a... See, and as always, Trump's like the outside player. You mean his DOJ that he controls? You have to understand how clear it is that this is being completely driven by Donald Trump in every way. That Bondi and Hegseth and Cash and all of them just do what they're told. That's not my opinion, guys. You can quite literally see this on the surface. So overlapping that with this effort to try to hijack what everyone's starting to recognize, just in case you didn't see the last show, I recommend you check it out because we go into it in depth. But this is a pretty good overview. James Lee breaks this down in regard to, as he calls, 100% Fed slop. That's not the one. Here we go.
It turns out one of the most viral stories of 2025 about the Somali daycare fraud in Minnesota ends up being a complete psyop. Because evidently, Israeli reporters are now asserting that Mossad and Israeli intelligence, not U.S. authorities, were responsible for exposing the Somalian-ran Minnesota fraud operations.
How is the Israeli Mossad related to the recent corruption that was discovered in Minnesota? You're not going to believe it, but there actually is a substantial connection, and it runs through the Israeli Prime Minister office. I'll start from the end. Israel just established relationships with Somaliland, which is not Somalia.
And what does that mean? Let's take a listen.
Does anyone know what Somaliland is, really? Said U.S. President Donald Trump after Israel became the first country in the world to recognize the self-proclaimed republic in Eastern Africa. Somaliland is a small territory in the Horn of Africa that broke off from Somalia in 1991. So why does Somaliland even matter? It sits on the Gulf of Aden, one of the world's most important shipping routes. There's also a Gaza-related angle. Earlier this year, it was reported that the US and Israel have explored Somaliland as a potential destination for displaced Palestinians from Gaza.
And bingo, that is why we've been hearing so much about Somalian fraud in Minnesota, because it had already been reported weeks before by the US attorney that fraud in Minnesota exceeded $9 billion. $9 billion, that's a whole lot of fraud compared to, what was it? Nick Shirley talked about $110 million, $9 billion. We're talking about a small fraction, but focusing specifically on the Somali community.
You see, and they do this. They reference the larger numbers of the bigger fraud and pretend like that's just these daycares. Because that's how dumb some people are out there, are willing to go along with whatever they're told. And most of these people, like the Shirleys or the Nick Storters out there, I don't think are smart enough to usually pick these things out, but they don't care is the point. You can see that they continue to just show what they're told. But I mean, think about the overlapping point there, right? Where was it? Right here. Hold on.
Somalian fraud in Minnesota, because it had already been reported weeks before by the U.S. attorney.
So the larger point, not the big number. As I just pointed out, you have Donald Trump's administration now handing over about $9 billion in regard to the different, basically as it ends with the, I forget which types, the jets that they're going to send to Israel. You know, so those may not be connected, but I find it really interesting that everyone's very rightly so up in arms and upset about a $9 billion manipulation, which seemingly does not have anything to do with these daycare points they're making. But here's $9 billion, Netanyahu, on top of the billions we've given you just since Trump's been in power. But that's not a problem, though. That's selective outrage. In fact, that's just straight up manipulation.
That fraud in Minnesota exceeded $9 billion. $9 billion, that's a whole lot of fraud compared to, what was it? Nick Shirley talked about $110 million, $9 billion. We're talking about a small fraction, but focusing specifically on the Somali community. And then you have the amplification of this story, which isn't necessarily organic, right? You have people like Elon Musk, Vice President J.D. Vance, Attorney General Pam Bondi, all
the rebels fighting the deep state, guys, the small ones out there fighting the power, all wildly elevating a story that works for their personal government agenda. But it's totally organic and independent.
Amplifying this story. I'm not discounting that the fraud exists within the Somali community,
right?
But is the focus, is the amplification
and it's also not just the Somali community. Like that is the case within this fine point. Are we pretending that only Somali communities are taking advantage of government manipulation or government or, defrauding the government or rather the U.S. taxpayer? I mean, really? This is what's just such a selective view. And like someone's asked in the chat, like, are Somali scammers or not? It's like, well, what's the question? You mean every single Somalian? That's just, and whether the person's joking or not, I'm not making it about that person, but in the general sense, like that, Trump doing that. Acting like every Somalian, or Jack Posobiec saying we imported Somali pirates, that's why, and Elon Musk going, that's correct. It's just disgusting what they're doing, and it's absolutely a broad brush point. It's not accurate, but it works because it helps you ignore whether it's the money going to Netanyahu or the fact that this is not really about fraud or the fact that they don't arrest anybody ever.
Making us feel a certain way, or trying to make us feel a certain way about the Somali community. That's the question. Now, according to Somali intelligence, Somaliland has accepted 3 Israeli conditions in exchange for Israeli recognition. 1 is the resettlement of Palestinians. 2, the establishment of an Israeli military base on the coast of the Gulf of Aden, and Somaliland joining the Abraham Accords. Well, isn't that a lovely and convenient development for the state of Israel that they get somewhere to dump the Palestinians? They also gain a critical and strategic military base, and they create an ally in the region that did not exist before. So maybe they get a resident independent journalist who maybe isn't so independent, if you read what this story is all about, to do a story that says Somalians bad.
Yep. I mean, it's just very clear what that drives. And that's not to say that there's not fraud, but I mean, it's not even to say it like that. There is fraud. But again, to the question generally, the point comes down to, yes, there's fraud, obviously. And you want to know how big it is? $9 billion. This has already been known. There's been people arrested for this. They're co-opting something to do something for Israel, it would appear. And let's realize, as he just showed you, as I showed you in my last show, it came Mossad and Israel media, at very least, they're claiming that they're the ones that broke this story. So there's no, and let's remember, I showed you yesterday, day before yesterday, that the local government said we were working with Nick Shirley on this. So you can't, the only way you have to understand that you can see this breaking down is that the Israeli government said, here's this thing, US government says, here's this thing, Nick Shirley, and Nick Shirley goes out and does that. But independent, and then they just pretend like, oh my God, look what he just discovered. And guess what? He doesn't have to prove anything. You're showing people at doors. It's just sad how easy it is to sway some people, but we have to be skeptical. I'm glad he broke this down because it gets reach and people can see the information. So on top of that, here's what Nick Shirley posted right after this. And if you want to pretend this is about the image and the reference, that's not the point. I'm saying, as Nick Shirley writes, whether this person sent him a message, again, so we're assuming, for all we know, he made this up or clipped this from something else, which does happen. Tim Pool was recently caught lying about what happened at his house. Guys, these people are grifters. It doesn't seem to change anything, which shows you that I don't think what they're doing is organic. But he says, this person says, you're going to die, or this is going to be you in April, I guess, is what the clip says, with a person dead. I believe it's an image from something in regard to the Holocaust or World War II. Now it says, this is not a joke. They actually want to kill me. It's in all seriousness, in all seriousness, please include me in your prayers. Okay. Well, let's make these points every time. I said the same script every time. You make yourself the victim while you're out there wildly misrepresenting an entire population, and doing so while you're being paid by the government committing fraud, and rather fraud, yes, and genocide. But the point is that, I mean, like, it's not about one versus the other, or like my point would be that we in this field get this all the effing time. I don't talk about it because it's a waste of time. You understand how many ridiculous, disgusting threats and actions and emails and it's crazy, guys. In fact, half the time the emails I want to get never show up or go to spam, but I sure as hell get all the ones right in my inbox that are disgusting and this is common. It's not okay. Doesn't mean it should be okay for him or that he shouldn't be able to talk about it. My point is to act like it's unique for you because you broke this big story. One, makes me highly skeptical that it's even happening. But two, if it does, it happens all over the place. Three, that people like doing what you're doing, like a Charlie Kirk point, for example, it's not unfair to point this out. And it's not to say it's justified that you would get attacked or threatened. But when you're doing something that's very contentious in ways that are dishonest, people will react. Sort of like when you're out there committing genocide in the Israeli government, and then people want to maybe, respond and kill somebody, which I'm not justifying. You understand maybe why they're acting irrationally. So when you draw this, and it's not to say you deserve it. See, it's always the same conversation, but it's just that it's understandable in the world that exists with what they're doing. But I don't believe this. At the end of the day, I think this is about trying to hype the idea that you're being threatened. Then it becomes the Democrats attack everybody, and then they start calling them fascists, terrorists, and monsters. But then you said fascist, you killed Charlie. It's all ridiculous, isn't it? Now, we talked about this in the last show, the Somali fraud pivot. Check it out. I think it's worth it. And we ended with the point about Iran in about hour 3.5. But I think it's important to understand all of this comes together. And I said the mass awakening of the American people. Now, let's talk about the larger foreign policy dynamic. And largely, we're going to start with Iran and then Venezuela. Largely the two things we're going to get into, but there's lots to discuss. First, it's important to really think about this in an objective scale, like, looking at past presidents. Obama was unprecedented with his droning, but that's no longer unprecedented, right? Bush, you can make these points about how at the time it was going, and people were rightly almost blown away, outraged. This is not what we represent, right? And then it continues, and it kind of seems like it's not important anymore because now it was normalized. Well, here we are. Trump has become the first U.S. president to bomb 7 countries in 1 year. Sort of funny, 7 countries, 5 years point, but realize The same countries, guys. This is almost identical to exactly what Israel's been trying to drive, exactly what these countries. I mean, I could play the clip again, but I want to get through this. Lots of things to get to. Of the very clear clip overlapping it with Netanyahu said with his book and how he wrote it, and the exact 7 countries in 5 years point. He's bombing, overlapping with that, but just clearly that this is not a peace president, guys. And many of these are new, right? I mean, many of Nigeria or anything, but these, you could say they're not wars, but it's either way an act of war, which would be illegal because Congress has not authorized it. But they are, guys. This is war. That's what that's called, especially since we're talking about bombing, invading, and arresting somebody in Venezuela right now. We weren't at war with Venezuela before. The U.S. government has long been at essentially a Cold War with Venezuela. But just be real about this. That's not what you were promised. Not, well, those 7 countries we need to fight for because they, makes us more free. If you had asked people when this first started, even for that very purpose, would Trump bomb 7 countries in the first year to keep America safe? They would say no. He promised no more wars. He promised no more of a, and most honest conservatives are now very upset about where this is going. You can see it for yourself. Here's what RFK Jr. even famously said. Not what happened.
Don't you want the regulatory agencies to be free from corporate corruption? And that's what President Trump told me that he wanted. He also told me that he wanted to end the grip of the neocons on U.S. foreign policy.
Nope.
And don't you want a president who's going to get us out of the wars and who's going to rebuild the middle class in this country?
Yeah, the opposite of both, by the way, if you weren't paying attention. But who knows, guys? Maybe they'll all change by next week. Look at Trump just lapping it up based on complete nonsense. So continuing. This one is my simple point about that overarching reality, right? So you could argue just warmongering, not peace president, right? But what does this represent? Again, take the time like we just recently did. Just look up the definition of globalist. This is not some kind of buzz term. It's not a catch-all. It's not overly broad. It's actually very specific. But it's weird that these terms, globalist, technocrat, Zionist, have become somehow like, oh, if you're saying those words, you're just a part of this group, or you're not paying attention, or you're being overly broad. No, guys. These are fundamental and definable points. And yes, the obvious Zionist organization, largely through the Israeli government, is openly stated involved in all this stuff. So it's not wrong to point that out. In this case, what they're doing is objectively a globalist agenda. You are very much for the one of the most obvious globalist overlaps, which is what Israel's doing with their Greater Israel plan and everything else. And you have to understand, guys, you could argue that the UN, for example, or let's just say the World Economic Forum and different points have their clear vision. And maybe that aligns more in some ways with what Democrats might like. I think it's more about just using what people want to hear, but that's just argue that's the case. Then you can have Israel over here going, we want to take over all this because we want to spread our Zionist ideology over all of this, or we want a greater Israel. Those are very different plans, but both are the same idea. As a globalist sense, as a power structure, you want to be in control over what people think and say and their policies, and that's a globalist point. That's what we're talking about. Now, it doesn't have to be that they're all fighting for the same thing. And on top of that, even like during COVID, you can always point out that even countries that are at odds, that very much disagree, will oftentimes align because what they want is control over you. So they'll align when it comes to control over your life, but ultimately they want to go different directions with it. So the resident says, again, the so-called peace president of the United States has bombed 7 countries in less than a year of his presidency. I simply just said the globalist president. Hashtag America first. Very important to think about the reality of that and stop hiding from, not you guys, but people that are, from how obvious this all is. Now, talking about Iran, I want to point out that Robert he put this plenty before this too, but this one is just one that I saw in searching. October 16th, 2025, the long con. The U.S. and Israel are again setting the table for regime change in Iran. Here we are. It's not even like that hard. I think a lot of people are making this point. So it's not like that difficult to be able to see where this is going because they've been pretty clearly signaling this. But it's worth noting that Robert was very much calling this out. Now we're going to play this video in a minute. Rudy Giuliani. But getting to the article he just put out. It's very well done. January 2nd. Israel launches its latest Iranian revolution as Trump threatens war. I just want to show you a couple points in this that I think are important to stand out. And also recognize that what Robert's breaking down here is something, all of this, and almost every point is sourced in this article, that you can take the time to research for yourself and find out that what's being screamed at the rooftops is not really what's going on. That's usually the case, and I think most Americans are really starting to understand that. But it says, from the first day of the war, and now what he's referencing here largely is the 12-day war back in June and other things before that, before we get to the actual current discussion. But he says, from the first day of the war, Benjamin Netanyahu publicly called the Iranian people to rise up and overthrow their government. He's doing that right now, and they're actually praising that they're manipulating on the ground. And imagine if that was any other country doing it to Israel or the United States. You damn well know that would be unprecedented terrorism, but they do it. It's freedom. Alongside the Israeli prime minister, their puppet Reza Pahlavi, the son of the deposed dictator Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, appeared repeatedly to urge a revolt in Iran and claim that the government was on the verge of collapse. It wasn't, though he was unable to mobilize even small crowds to protest in his favor. Same point today. The reality is we're at a point where, just like Venezuela, by the way, it's provable that there's not popular support behind what's happening. And I mean, and the desperate effort to basically lie. I mean, I shouldn't say basically to lie, but there's other efforts to just misrepresent. AI imagery, old videos like Alex Jones. Look at everyone's on their side. Nope, not the reality. Look at everyone's they're cheering for. Nope, that's Florida, guys. It's lazy. But honestly, I think it's just dishonest. I think they're doing this because that's what people want. The agenda needs. So at this point, same thing, wasn't able to really garner any support. Now, it says the Shah's son, and that's one of the people that are being floated as the person who might come to power, or possibly blank on our name again. I've talked about it before. The leader, one of the leaders of the MEK. There's a couple examples. Same with Venezuela. I think right now it's sort of like whatever we can do to gain control over this, we don't even care. I think they also know that most people in the U.S. as well as in Iran and Venezuela don't want what they're putting forward. So, when it's Machado in Venezuela or the Shah over here, people are like, F no, we don't want those people. But maybe are more amenable to take something different. And so I think this is where they're at with this agenda. But it says the Shah's son, who was given the title, and this is so funny to me, because it is his title, the Crown Prince of Iran, has no formal position of power and leads no widespread movement beyond limited support among some monarchists in exile. Monarchists, like the Queen of England. He made his first public visit to Israel in April 23, where he was hosted by Israeli officials. Now, it says following the visit, he received prominent coverage in Western corporate media, often referred to uncritically as Crown Prince by supposed journalists. Yet, the messaging around this manufactured leader makes little sense, as he seeks to return to a hereditary monarchy where he would rule as a dictator. That's not even, that's what their terms are. That's what he is. But weirdly, while claiming to turn Iran into democracy. As Robert jokingly said to me on a text exchange, was, the Crown Prince of democracy, apparently. This is the kind of insanely stupid thing we keep seeing. I mean, Guaido, and this is not just Trump's administration, but Guaido, it was the same thing. It was ridiculous. It was clumsy. It had no support. And they really tried to force that in. I think this is just the ineptitude of the current power structure of the United States. The dwindling empire that they think they're always thinking of themselves as that powerful, but they clearly are not able to carry these things out anymore. Now, that doesn't mean they can't just bull rush and arrest somebody and put them to death or illegally execute with drone strikes. But when it comes to actually carrying these things out and controlling people's mindsets, they're not winning in this. But how can you be a crown prince and have a hereditary monarchy? And you can look this up. This is what they're discussing. He's the son of the previous Shah. Is that being elected? Is that democracy? But here they are saying he's going to bring back democracy to Iran. They're laughing in your face, guys. And that's why when you have these other Iranians out there going, yay, we support Trump's agenda, those people do not, they're either too dumb to see how blatantly ridiculous that is, or they are not on the side of Iranians. Now, that's my framing. Sure, there's probably other options in there, but I think it's very clear. Now, continuing, on December 28th, 2025, peaceful protesters took to the streets. This is exactly what we were discussing in the first place. And almost every time how this works, everywhere, whether it's Syria, many different locations, except interestingly today, there's currently people protesting in Syria being killed by the government, the one that they support, and now they don't care. Funny how it's exactly what happened the first time when they used it to go after Assad, even though you can prove that they're the ones involved with shooting those protesters, like they did in Ukraine, like they do everywhere, guys. But in this case, you had protesters who were peacefully protesting. And this was pretty well documented. And they were shop owners and different clerks and people that were saying the money, the rials collapsed so much that we can't sustain ourselves. that we don't know we can't rely on anything. And so it's clear that they came out protesting that. But there was a huge overlap with the fact that that was because of U.S. sanctions, but still are saying we want you to do something different, our government. Now it says that this was the streets across Iran, including Tehran, Isfahan, Kerman, and others. Now, shopkeepers and merchants demonstrated against their government. The government's mismanagement, that is clear, where no one's hiding that, of the economy, which has led to a deepening of the ongoing inflation crisis in the country. Very different, though, than wanting a foreign power to come in and do what they want at your expense, or even pretend they're going to help you. That's not what they're calling for. Labor protests, such as these by workers, are not uncommon in Iran due to economic pressures. Now, realize that you can prove, like it was with Venezuela, that the sanctions they're driving are why this is happening. But that's in conjunction with what Iran does of their own policies, and many people, possibly correctly, believe that it's partly their fault. Now, like, for example, you could argue that I actually think this is a big part of it, that there are Iranians who don't want U.S. and Israel involved, but would argue that maybe you should be complying in some way, because they're standing their ground and saying, but ultimately maybe you deal with them. Maybe you take action in that direction to make sure our lives are better. You might even argue it's a valid point from people who averagely live in their lives and don't care about the global dynamic of politics. But there's much more going on here, as we can see. And if they were to be passive, I think they would have been out of power a long time ago. But it says that these kinds of protests are quite routine in the Islamic Republic, as Iran allows demonstrations, which is true and easily verifiable, despite the claims. And such protests will frequently, again, which you can easily verify, frequently lead after these protests to reforms, resignations of government officials. It's actually pretty common. And it says, for example, in the sense that there's responses and actions taken afterward, not that those two things happen every time. For example, on December 9th, 2025, thousands of petroleum contract workers at the South Pars gas complex protested and were backed by local unions in doing so. Simply overlap today with that point because of the unions who first supported them. And then the moment they saw who was running the, black clad, burning things down and wasn't part of it, they revoked that support, saying these aren't the Iranians. This is people from outside. But it says that first, they were supported on December 9th by those unions. In fact, the demonstration was recorded as larger in size than any of the protests that started on December 28th. This time, he writes, however, and this is currently, Israeli and Iranian opposition accounts across social media began pushing old videos, like we just showed you Alex Jones doing for Venezuela, of riots to claim that the major uprising was occurring. It wasn't. During the first days of the protests, which were backed by major unions inside Iran, a few instances of agent provocateurs attempting to stir trouble were recorded, along with chants calling for the fall of the government, which we showed you, which wasn't really the claim from people that were there protesting for the government to change their policies. That's what I was trying to say about if it was MAGA, right? With everything they're saying, supporting, fighting for America and America first, and then they were angry with Donald Trump, and in the protest, they burned the American flag. Does that sound like that lines up? It doesn't. So when you have these people coming in going, down with Iran, burn the flag, that's what Israel wants. That's what U.S. wants, not what Iranians want. They want change, like we all do. Look at our country, but not that. And it says, yet the shopkeepers even forced these hostile elements out of their demonstrations, at least at first. Despite the absence of major social unrest and the demonstrations being almost entirely nonviolent, a propaganda campaign online depicted a reality entirely different from the one unfolding on the ground. This became particularly evident when Israel's former Prime Minister, Naftali Bennett, uploaded a video declaring support for the alleged Iranian uprising, signaling that the situation was likely to escalate. And again, don't forget that they have already publicly said, this is the Jerusalem Post, we are with you. Mossad spurs Iran protests, says agents with demonstrators. And we'll get to Pompeo saying the same thing. But so he pushed this out, trying to escalate this, claiming, but this gets the world involved, claiming that there's a massive, think about how easy it is to point out that Naftali Bennett from Israel states this, and suddenly the entire Western Elon Musk's, Twitter apparatus just whirls into and just backs up what he said with no evidence. How do you not see what's driving this and where that comes from? It says, as the new year dawned, the situation suddenly deteriorated with armed agitators opened fire on security forces and attempted to storm government buildings, armories, police stations. On January 1st, 2 Iranian police officers were murdered. 3 rioters were also reportedly shot dead. Videos began emerging of protesters lighting police officers on fire, and another incident occurred where rioters beat, stabbed, and kicked a security officer in the head, who is allegedly now in a coma. Now, you can talk to people around this. This is the point. Robert's been doing the due diligence on this, that these are people that come, like they were just talking about. This is why the unions are now saying we don't support the people who are doing this. That's not the organic protest, because they rush in like we see that happens in this country, and they throw a Molotov cocktail and then break windows and run away, and then police use that as a justification. In this case, they're literally beating up the people, the security forces, and then they frame that as legitimate protest, first of all, which is ridiculous, and then that's them fighting for freedom in Iran. The violent incidents on January 1st were almost entirely taking place in Western Iran, particularly in the ethnic minority province of Lorestan. However, on social media, and this is so easy to see, the pro-Israel Iranian opposition media were promoting disinformation about uprisings in Tehran and the overthrow of the government. Remember how often I said this in the beginning about Ukraine? They somehow, I think they expected that to happen so quickly. Within the first few days, or even the first day, I believe, corporate media was reporting that they were rolling into Kiev. And I pointed out that wasn't true, but it was a kind of a ubiquitous report. Ultimately, we see where the front line ended up, and they weren't rolling into Kiev. But the argument became, because the narrative was what was driving it. That came from the U.S. and Israel. So the same kind of idea. They hope if they just push the idea that then somehow drives the action. Sometimes it does, but they were lying about it. That's not what happened. And you can prove that today. It says, for example, the popular Iranian opposition channel called 2C TV, and see, there's so many of these that are Iranian channels, but not, right? And this is the same thing that the US and Israel and the UK have been doing forever. They create these fake channels that operate in other countries. It's what Israel brags about these days, right? With companies making fake companies to affect supply chains. Same thing with media. But says the 2C TV published a live stream titled, quote, "Breaking, Iranians take control of the IRGC police stations." Didn't happen. A revolution in Iran, but they were trying to make that happen. So you see there's a connection to what they're reporting. But it says not only had no police stations been taken over anywhere in the country, but the live stream was simply an interview with, guess who, guys? Israeli propagandist Emily Schrader, the blonde-haired one that's just one of the most vile people in that conversation, who's lying about damn near everything. 2C TV even posted on Twitter a breaking news update stating IRGC, so basically the Iranian military, forces flee Iranian cities. Khamenei leaves Tehran. So what they hope is that other Iranian police will see the report and go, oh my God, I'm getting out of here, right? Or that Khamenei, people hear he left, and then they side with somebody else because he left us. It's propaganda. It's meant to turn people against their government. None of that actually happened, both of which were completely false. Meanwhile, pro-Israel Iranian diaspora voices such as Goldie Gamari, who we just talked about, posted nonstop about an alleged nationwide uprising, fantasizing about an Iran without the religion of Islam, spreading outlandish, often anti-Muslim disinformation. Remember, she was the one I just talked about who was trying to claim, even though you can easily look this up, that Iran was never a Muslim country. That it was always a Western type country, but then when they overthrew it in 79, they turned, well, you can quite literally prove that before Operation Ajax, that it was to some degree. Obviously, yes, as I pointed out, there was an overreaction to after the West basically took control, turned it into a complete despotic, Western controlled, the oligarchs at the top were living pretty nice, but everybody else was suffering. And it's easy to prove. But she's the one claiming all this is happening, and you can prove that it didn't happen. And her video starts where I'm an Iranian. Check this out. It's like, that's how they play this. Now it says the next day. Now, before I go past that, consider what she has to say, right? One, because she's an Iranian, but two, because consider what anybody has to say. And then realize that you can prove she's lying. But don't disregard anything. I always think that's important. Consider it, prove it, or not. Or rather, prove it that it's a lie or that it's true, but consider it. The next day, a new wave of violent attacks on security forces occurred, along with an attempt to storm another armory. Other incidents included lone arsonists setting fire to cars in Qom, and as well as armed attacks and small groups of violent agents throwing stones at police officers. In one case, a group of 6 armed assailants executed a member of Iran's Basij volunteer paramilitary force. On January 2nd, all the major unions that had originally supported the peaceful protest issued statements denouncing the wave of unrest and riots. It is important to consider that these protests, at the present moment, have no popular participation. It's quite easy to prove. Israel's official Persian language account on Twitter even created a fake AI image of Iranian police using a water cannon on a protester, even though that's something that happens all the time in Israel, and it says, in a desperate attempt to generate outrage. But funny how that they use something they do often to create outrage about what Iran's doing. It's perfect, makes the point for yourself, or makes the point itself. But they lied, guys. It's all over. Now, we're going to give you many points like this today over both these conversations where people are just straight up making fake videos, using old content. It happens every single time, usually driven by the whole weird Twitter Elon Musk overlap. Now, again, they told you that Mossad was on the ground cultivating what's happening. That should be a big deal. But apparently because Iran bad guy, it doesn't matter. It's pathetic. Now, Mike Pompeo came out in the second and said the Iranian regime is in trouble, really trying to signal what he wants people to think. Bringing in mercenaries is the last best hope. And it says riots in dozens of cities. No, again, that's not even really what happened, but they were trying to cause that. But it goes, Happy New Year to every Iranian in the streets. Also to every Mossad agent walking beside them. That's what he said. Wild. Now, Brian Berlatic points out the Which Path to Persia document, which we've talked about many times over the years. He just says, on riots in Iran, just a reminder that U.S. policy papers like the 2009 Brookings Which Path to Persia focuses on the overthrow and destruction of Iran and lists a number of options, including sanctions, color revolutions, terrorism. It really does. It's easy to look up. Proxy war using Israel and outright U.S. war. All options the U.S. has now reportedly used and will continue using both one after the other as well as in combination. Riots in Iran will be combined with all these other options, including terrorism and almost certainly additional military aggression by proxy and directly when the opportunity presents itself. So here is, oh, wait. Oh, you know what? I'll maybe pull this aside for later. That's from an article I might get to down in the end that I'll want to bring up, the highlighting. So here is from the document, one part that stands out. I think it was Orwell that highlighted this. It's important to think about because of what he just argued. This is simply them addressing in this document Reza Pahlavi, the son of the deposed dictator. Another name pointed to as a potential leader of Iran is Reza Pahlavi, the son of the last Shah. In the United States, Pahlavi has emerged as a leading critic of the clerical regime, calling for it to be confronted politically and economically, because it obviously is in his interest. Pahlavi has referred to himself as a catalyst to help bring about regime change. Yes, exactly, in a democratic and constitutional government, including perhaps a constitutional monarchy. So stupid. Rather than a return to the absolutist monarchy of his father, which it's no different. That's ridiculous. And it says, while Iranian expatriate sponsored media have broadcast interviews with Pahlavi into the Islamic Republic, Pahlavi, listen up, lacks an organized following within the country. So why then would they be proposing he be in power when nobody wants that? Because they don't care what you want. However, although some Iranians, particularly younger ones with no memory of his father's regime, appear to invent some nostalgia for the monarchy, there is no serious monarchist movement in Iran. Now, this is an old document, but it's the same point today. It's worth reading through this to understand the kind of things they're capable of and willing to outline publicly in a document. Here is today's Jerusalem Post, or from the second. Front lines, Javid Shah, why Iranians are calling for the return of the Shah. Yeah, kind of hard to see where this drives from, right? Gee, I wonder what's driving this narrative. And here's Reza Pahlavi coming out on the 2nd after Donald Trump puts out a post with a typo that we'll come back to in 1 second. But he says, if Iran shots and violently kills peaceful protesters, which is their custom, you mean your custom? The United States of America will come to their rescue. This is just like when they said, if anybody does something in Syria, we're going to blame Assad, which they did. Here we are. It's the identical kind of policy. Well, what happens if anybody reads that and goes, hey, go shoot a protester? They're going to blame them. Maybe that's the whole plan, guys. I'm not joking. You can easily prove this has been shown and repeated. Ukraine, Syria, it's what they do. Faking gas attacks. I mean, this is what the group does, guys. But it's funny. The White House just literally repeats, if Iran shots and violently kills peaceful. But Pahlavi goes, President Trump, thank you for your strong leadership and support of my compatriots. I guess he means the exiled monarchists that exist around the world. I mean, this is like them supporting any number of these. What was his name? Hadi, that lived in Saudi Arabia. They claim he's president of Yemen. He's not. Nobody wants him there. Or Guaido for Venezuela. It's just a joke. It's a joke how obvious this is. But yeah, my compatriots want me there. And he says, this warning you have issued to the criminal leaders of the Islamic Republic gives my people greater strength and hope. Hope that at last the president of the United States is standing firmly by their side as they risk their lives to end this regime's 46-year reign. And it says of chaos and terror. They send me with a responsibility and a message to seek the relationship Iran once had with America. Yeah. Guys, you know how easy it is to prove that Iranians don't want that? It's one of the easiest things in the conversation. Nobody in the world wants that today. It says that brought peace and prosperity to the Middle East. Oh, it did it? Like, you could lie and pretend it brought peace to Iran. It didn't. You can prove that with so many historical documents. But in what world did their previous relationship bring peace to the Middle East? There was chaos. Still the same point today. Guess who was driving that chaos? And they have a plan for stable transition for Iran. Oh, they do they? How is the stable transition for Iraq? How is the stable transition for Libya? How is the stable transition for God? I mean, look, come on, guys. These people just have their narrative and they don't know what else to say, I guess. With your leadership of the free world. Oh, you mean like a globalist world leadership? Yes, you said the quiet part out loud. We can leave a legacy of lasting peace. I mean, it's all over the place, guys. You have to realize this is exactly that point. Your leadership of the free world. Continuing, here's what Grok had to say. So give me a quick one-paragraph breakdown of what Operation Ajax was, whether it was illegal, and whether Iranians in majority supported the government. Now, you don't need Grok to point this out. I've done entire shows on this. But my point is always just to highlight how this Republican cultivated Grok will tell you literally, what everyone on their side right now is lying about. Operation Ajax was also known as the 1953 Iranian coup d'etat. Was a covert operation orchestrated by the CIA and Britain's MI6 to overthrow Iran's democratically elected prime minister, Mohammad Mossadegh. The one I told you was pretty westernized, I guess. Had pictures of himself next to the Liberty Bell. Was always talking about how he wanted that to be. At least that's what he projected. And you can look at Paul. It seemed to be the reality. And it's quite typical of the person who actually identifies with some of the things they pretend that the U.S. government wants. They get rid of and put a dangerous person there. Why? Because he'll do whatever they want. While stealing and raping and torturing, yes, but they don't care about any of that. That's why they work with the worst of the worst, because they get what they want done to a degree and then turn on those people too. Mossadegh was willing to work, and you can look up the historical conversations. He was not willing to just hand over interest of Iran to a foreign power, so they got him out of the way. But even they'll tell you democratically elected, because that was true, and who had nationalized the country's oil industry. Doesn't this seem interesting? Isn't this what MAGA people are talking about? Nationalize America first, Iran first, or whatever the focal point on your own place. And the idea of the nationalization of the oil, which is exactly what's happened in the past. Venezuela. I mean, this is the same conversation on repeat. Threatening British interests. That's why it mattered. Nationalizing the oil was going to hurt the Western powers. And where was it? It says, motivated by protecting Western oil access and Cold War fears of potential Soviet influence. And get this, despite Mossadegh being anti-communist. MAGA, this guy was on your side. This guy was quite literally what you are all pretending to be today. I shouldn't say that about you, but from the government's perspective. Right? They pretend to be libertarian. They pretend to fight for these things. They don't care about any of this. They're removing people that actually embody the ideals you fight for and working with people who simply say it out loud and don't care about it. He was not what they claimed. Remember, they're claiming it was a terrible, whatever they want to create about the historical point, or rather like the Ghomani point, just start from after they took back power. But it says the operation involved, Operation Ajax, propaganda, paid mobs, posing as protesters. Doesn't it sound familiar? Bribery of military and religious figures, and pressuring the Shah to dismiss Mossadegh, ultimately basically bringing Mohammad Reza Pahlavi into power on 1953, August 19th. The coup was widely regarded as illegal, because it was, under international law, constituting a violation of Iran's sovereignty, correct, and the UN Charter's prohibition of interference on domestic affairs through covert regime change, similar to the later ICJ rulings against the U.S. actions in Nicaragua. Yeah, nothing new, guys. Prior to the coup, now we're going to come back to the whole UN Charter point, because that's important, because right now the argument about that is what it even goes back to Bill Barr, that they don't have to comply with international law, exactly like Israel points out. I don't think that's a coincidence. But it says prior to the coup, Mossadegh enjoyed broad popular support among the majority of Iranians for his nationalist stance against foreign domination. This is ridiculous, isn't it? But of course, it's fake news. Why do you Grok? I'm not claiming as ever that I listened to Grok blindly. The point is to show you that the Republican cultivated Grok is telling you, which you can otherwise prove, the very thing that challenges the narrative that's circulating today. So here is the Crown Prince, Reza Pahlavi, spoken message from the Crown Prince. Now, this person is, hey, look, Persian, Dutch, anti-Islam. Typical, right? Saying the point is that, you got these like Iranians who hate Iran and hate Muslims, but they pretend they're fighting for what Iranians want. Spoken message from Crown Prince to the Iranian people. To my compatriots, at this moment, the Islamic Republic has reached its end, and in the process of collapse, Khomeini's gone into hiding. None of that's true. Not only is that not true, but guess what? Oops. This was posted by Pahlavi back in July, back when Robert was talking about. But it doesn't matter to the people like this because the narrative is what's important. This guy's, I'm fighting for freedom. No, you're lying. You're lying to support narrative that's actually fighting against Iranian interests. But this is what you're seeing everywhere. But that doesn't matter. The video shared like basically every prominent person in this conversation. On top of that, Thomas Massey points out we have problems at home and shouldn't be wasting military resources on another country's internal affairs. Trump's post about the shots and violently killing protesters. Military strikes on Iran require congressional authorization. Same with Venezuela, by the way. Doesn't change. This threat isn't about freedom of speech in Iran. It's about the dollar, oil, and Israel. Every day, Thomas Massey makes one more point on my list, continuing to do what I think is the principled stance and saying not only the right thing, but the whole thing, really calling out the big picture. Here's this person, account's literally called Freedom. It says, I stand behind Trump on this one. The people of Iran are asking. Oh, are they? I'm sure we can prove that, can't we? Here's the website where Iranians are all telling you they all want this. My point is this is not real. These kind of accounts, in my opinion, are either people that are out there just yelling there's one of two ways to look at it. I'm very much of the mind that we're dealing with this, probably more of this platform than not are people who aren't genuine. Israeli bot accounts or just literal bots of some kind of an algorithm. But at the end of the day, it could be average people that are just saying that. Okay, let's embrace it like that. This person's real. Okay. I stand behind Trump on this one. Probably that's the case for most of them, regardless of what the statement is or what the action is. But what do you mean the people of Iran are asking? What does that matter? You have to understand. Let's just say, so by this logic, what happens if everybody in trying to pick of a different example than Iran, and let's just even say everybody in Iran says, we want you to go arrest Donald Trump, put him in jail. Does that then make it okay? What if everyone in the United States was saying, we want you to go? It doesn't change the legal reality because you claim people call for it. It's just this lazy kind of sidestep to act like we care about the law and freedom and democracy and liberty, but then get them because they said so. You see my point, guys? Like, that's a very interesting deviation from what they claim they want. So that's why my gut tells me these aren't honest. But Jimmy Dore points out, here's Reza Pahlavi. Here's Adam saying it. The man Trump and Netanyahu want to install as the new leader of Iran. Here he is praying at the wall with his yarmulke on, which, by the way, seems to happen. Everybody, literally all of them involved in this agenda. Even the Christians, by the way. Now, I'm not saying that's a problem that you do that. What it shows you is this weird kind of ritual to go and make this case. I mean, who was it? I think it was George Galloway made this point. Right across the way over here is one of the most prominent Christian places in the world. And they don't all take pictures there. They all go and take the pictures and make this whole thing for Israel. And really for Zionism, if you want to really break it down, despite what the wall represents. And Jimmy says, yes, it does make sense now. I still can't get over how obvious and blatant they are about it. They know Americans will never rise up against this, and so they don't even bother finding good lies to tell us anymore. See, this is the whole conversation being shown today. Now, to the point about the actual manipulations, Aria, who is an account you should follow, she does good work. This is a larger point about what's driving this. Now, this has come out in regard to a video that's circulating. It's being reported as such. Phones from arrested rioters had a video of a woman giving instructions on how they should act when they were caught. You can listen to it, and there's even a translation down below. So what's happening is, these people that are breaking windows and shooting people get arrested, and they're looking through their phones, and they're finding a video of a woman speaking in Iranian, but you can listen to it's like an English accent. It seems clearly like some kind of foreign agent, as they say, telling them what to do. If you've been arrested, don't think it's the end of it. You can still have time to protect yourself. Giving statements as a confession, such as, I came to protest high prices so the government would hear our voice. Like literally telling them what to say. It's very interesting. But just to make it quick, this is just this translation bot. And it says, advice on denying foreign links. Literally what they're talking about, guys. Why would that be on their videos if they're regular protesters? And it says, changing your phone wallpaper and playing their game is now fully available with English subtitles. Transcript snippet. If you get arrested, it's not the end. You still have time to protect yourself. Then they try to link you to people abroad or say you were. Very interesting. Like, this is just so obvious, but this is what we get from people who are drowning in their own lies and spread too thin. Now, this is just that post of Donald Trump saying, if you shoot protesters, we're going to stop you. Oh, as I said, this happens every single time. As expected, Trump is setting the narrative for yet another attempted regime change in Iran. This is on the 2nd, using the same tired protester claim, despite the U.S. historically lying about this, and that's easily verifiable. Now, here's the Guardian article. Iran officials warned Trump of red line after his threat to rescue protesters. It's clear they're pushing back. So, this was that same point about Massey, just simply pointing out that this is unconstitutional in regard to Iran, and that what it's about is Israel, oil, not about what they claim. Now, Glenn Greenwald highlights that and says, in case you're wondering why 3 fanatically pro-Israel oligarchs, Miriam Adelson, Paul Singer, John Paulson, are single-handedly funding the campaign to remove Massey from Congress, see below. His point, too much America first. Can't have that. Just think about that, because that's what he's doing. He's actually representing an America first agenda. You can question whether he means it. It seems so right now. The reality is that what they're doing is the opposite. And yet you've got all these blind followers screaming about how he's fighting for freedom, fighting the deep state, America first. It's pretty obvious, I think, to most people right now. Now, this is Ali Larijani saying, in regard to the same Trump statement about shooting protesters, he says, with the statements by Israeli officials and Donald Trump, what has been going on behind the scenes is now clear, in his opinion, but I agree. We distinguish between the stance of the protesting shopkeepers and the actions of disruptive actors. And Trump should know that U.S. interference in this internal matter would mean destabilizing the entire region and, guess what, destroying American interests. The American people should know Trump started this adventurism. They should be mindful of their soldiers' safety. I mean, think about this. If this is actually America first, or peace president, no new war, why would this make sense? He's making a very good point to realize this is actually hurting the interest that MAGA are actually fighting for. If you really think it through, they don't care about American interest. Ari also points out, as we were saying earlier, the merchants and economic unions that were originally protesting have all denounced and condemned the riots, and making it clear the distinction, as he was just highlighting, between people protesting organically and whatever comes rushing in to make these things look violent. And you can go through and look, all the unions they've put them out and then put statements out claiming they didn't support it anymore. On top of that, unprecedented, she writes, Iranians from cities where riots took place last night, this on the 2nd, have come to protest against the rioters. Now, as always, question these things, that it could be the counterbalance parts, not organic. Question that. But if you really look into this, it becomes quite clear the tactics that are always used, and there's plenty of evidence to verify most of what they're saying. And you can look at the large protests, not even much larger than these, than what they're claiming is people protesting and rioting and trying to overthrow the government and failing, which is the point. If they had enough, the people they claim they did, they wouldn't be failing. So now you have people the next day coming out in mass to protest against the outside interference. Iranians from the different locations and other cities have come in mass to denounce and condemn the behaviors of rioters. They condemn vandalism, destruction of property, and it's the same thing you get in this country, whether left or right, where people are coming out and they're saying, look, we don't support any of these things, because they know these provocateurs come in and break windows, and because it gives them justification. It happened with trucker convoys and MAGA protests. It happens with Antifa and left. But whether there's always an effort to try to drive this into what they can use. Now, overlapping this with who they were going to suggest is in power, one of the examples, other than the Reza Pahlavi, son of the Shah, the dictator, is the MEK. Let's not forget who very much is pretty much everyone in the U.S. government, for the most part, but Rudy Giuliani. This is an older video where and I'm going to play this again because it's quite insane what he was actually saying about this. I don't think he ever really thought this would get much attention. It still doesn't get as much as it should. But here's what he said first. Actually, that's right. It's not worth it. He goes on for, his point is not necessarily what he's basically saying is Iran's Ayatollah overthrown would be good for the world. If it's overthrown, it would be a historic event with major implications for Israel and the world. Well, yes, exactly. That's the whole point. That's what it's really about. I said, here you are speaking at a paid gig. I think it was 50,000. I forget the number for the MEK, which, by the way, was even identified as an extremist terrorist group by the U.S. government before I think it was Clinton took them off the list. These are old. I might be misremembering that, but it was very clearly on these lists, and it was somebody in the government that took it off. I believe it was Clinton. Bragging about how your efforts, Giuliani and the U.S. government, are causing average Iranians to, quote, sell their own organs for food, just like today with the sanctions and the collapse of the rial. And it says, and that these are the kind of conditions that lead to successful revolution. I said, you belong in prison. Here's what he said.
So now tell me that you're not a serious threat. If the regime we're trying to overthrow sees us as a threat, you are a threat. It is a reality. The protests are getting worse. I don't know when we're going to overthrow them. It could be in a few days, months, a couple of years, but it's going to happen. They are going to be overthrown. The people of Iran obviously have now had enough. The sanctions are working. The currency is going to nothing. They're where Russia was. They're where Poland was. We see signs of young men and women saying, give me some food. We saw a sign of a man trying to sell his internal organs for $500 American, probably a fortune in Iran today. This is truly pitiful. These are the kinds of conditions that lead to successful revolution and, God willing, nonviolent revolution.
Yes, so he said nonviolent. So clearly, think about what he's saying. Now, clearly, that's not the reality. The MEK, who he's speaking to, are outspoken about the kind of things they want to do. It's not hard to find. But he literally just said, exactly as it sounds, that this guy was selling for $500 American his organs for food. This is what leads to a good. I mean, you can't decouple that. They're praising that their sanctions, which is what caused that, and that's not being denied, cause these people to suffer, and that their suffering is what leads to revolution. Yes, that's exactly the point, because they know that people, even though those people know who's causing it, if you're desperate enough, you just want it to stop. If it goes on for years, you just want your child to be fed. They know what they're doing, and they're monsters, guys. And there's no way around that. Now, I guess you could argue they rationalize the terrible thing because they convince themselves that Iranian government's just so evil. Well, then so are you, though. Let's just even say everything you say is true. You're still doing evil to fight evil. And that's the point I'm always making about what they do in foreign policy. And in most cases, they're lying about what actually happened. On top of that, here's an article from Whitney Webb back in 2018. Former MEK official exposes Saudi Arabia's covert funding of Iranian terror group. The point is simply about how they were manipulating groups in Iran for their interest. Same thing we're seeing today. It's a good article. Now, here is, it's Miriam Rajavi. That was her name. And this is the one of the leading elements of the MEK. Fellow compatriots, architects of the Iran protests. Think about the way she said that. And rebellious youth, students and merchant. The relentless surge of your righteous anger is rising and gathering. This is just setting the tone that they want people to think is happening, because this is not what happened. 1,000 salutes to you, the forces of the democratic revolution and the great army of freedom. I mean, it's just, we're winning and we're going to take over. Thousands of salutations and martyrs, blah, blah, blah. Okay. The point is that she's out here saying this on the 2nd about the fact that we're going to take control. You can read her article. Excuse me. Here's Goldie Gamiri. That's her name. She was the one I was just telling you about. The one that's literally claiming that the country wasn't, what it was before. It's dishonest. And Trump comes in and says the United States of America has successfully carried out a large-scale strike in Venezuela, and its leader, President Nicolas Maduro, who has been, and there's a reason it's to this, we're going to come back to Venezuela in a second, but she makes a comment about it, who has been, along with his wife, captured and flown to the country. And this has happened, by the way. This operation was done in conjunction with U.S. law enforcement. Details to follow. Okay. She says, oh my God, I just realized something. Trump went after Maduro first to make sure Khomeini and the terrorist Islamic Republic occupying Iran can't escape to Venezuela when, let's just make things up. I mean, maybe the idea, first of all, the idea that you think that the most logical place, This is about trying to set the narrative as if we know for a fact that these groups are colluding in some kind of terrorist network. Yeah, they're allies, very clearly, and allies in resistance to your ongoing authoritarian dictatorial actions. But clearly, this is about trying to set the tone that this is coordinated to support freedom in the world. And this is what Israel just said, that Venezuela is Iran and Hezbollah. There's nothing to back this up. They are allied, and that's basically the point. This is all of the RGC assets, drone factories, military bases are now in the hands of the United States. No, that's actually not true. It appears as if they have basically zero control and influence over what's going on in Venezuela, but they've taken Maduro. We'll come back to that. My point is that these people from the Iranian side of it are showing you that there is an overlap to these very clear narratives, that they want to be connected. Here's Reza Pahlavi, the same person we talked about, saying, my thoughts are with my friend, Maria Corina Machado, President-elect Gonzalez, and the brave people of Venezuela. Right. Okay. So you're in the midst of this. This is on the 3rd. So today he comes out and goes, I'm with you in Venezuela. This is about trying to clearly set the tone that we're all fighting for the same agenda against all the evil people of the world. But I'm trying to show you that this is a connection. It's interesting that they're involved in the same thing, and it is the same agenda. He goes, like my own countrymen, I have persevered through hardship. May Venezuelans sacrifice, together with a free Iran, free Venezuela will bring peace and stability. Yeah. When has that ever happened? When, first of all, they're not free after you completely destroy them and sell it off to the highest bidder. But historically, 0 times, guys, 0, like the amount of arrests they've done, 0. Look at Libya, look at Syria, look at Iraq, look at every place they've ever claimed to liberate. Iraq's the best example, as they literally said, we're going to be welcomed as liberating heroes. They knew that wasn't true. They knew what they planned to do. Same thing here. Why do we keep falling for this? Okay, let's talk about Venezuela. Maduro, this is on the 2nd, says Venezuela is ready to make a deal with the United States on drugs and oil after military strikes. Okay. So it was, and this is not the first time. Maduro said this a while back and they all kind of made fun of it. And my point was, well, if he actually accepts the deal, wouldn't that be funny, seeing as how he's like, it's drugs and terrorism, and then, oh, okay, I'll take oil and we're done. That would show you wasn't what it was really about. But they clearly knew that, hey, we'll just take it all because we're going to remove him. That was the point. But this shows you, excuse me, that Maduro was willing to, in some way, make an agreement. Probably because he sensed that there was something happening. So after he says this, here's what J.D. Vance says today. The president offered multiple off-ramps, but was very clear throughout this process. Guess what? The drug trafficking must stop. That's what he referenced, Maduro. And the stolen oil must be returned. Okay, wait a minute. So those are the things you wanted, and Maduro came out yesterday and said, I'll give you those things, and nothing changed? Maybe it wasn't about those things. I mean, this is how lazy these people are. You realize that's not the first time, so it even went back further. So Maduro was trying to comply with exactly what you were asking for, and you guys didn't care because you're pirates. I think that should be quite obvious by now. Maduro is the newest person to find out that President Trump means what he says. Well, clearly not. Clearly not. Kudos to our brave special operators who pulled off an impressive illegal operation. Yeah, I added illegal, by the way, because that's what it was. Here's what Pam Bondi said. This is where it gets ridiculous on top of everything else. Nicolas Maduro and his wife have been indicted in the Southern District of New York. Now, just being indicted by a U.S. court makes no sense. Because you have to understand, from any normal legal channel, this should be an internationally handled dynamic. Like going to an international court. But you know why they don't do that? Because they're war criminals right now, in the eyes of the international court. U.S., Netanyahu. So they rush them back to the United States. Where's the legal standing in that? Why does Maduro in any way what's the standing to hold him accountable in U.S. law? On top of the fact that what you're claiming he's done is mostly not even true. On top of the fact that you guys are all guilty for everything you're claiming he's doing. This is just about control. And it says Nicolas Maduro has been charged with narco-terrorism conspiracy. Right. Like, haven't we talked about this 100 times over? The idea of the DEA being caught trafficking in 2025, or the obvious pardoning of Hernandez for Trump weeks ago. But see, this is what everybody's saying because everybody sees how flimsy this is. And I mean, I shouldn't say it like that, being too broad. A huge portion of the conversation, it's very prominent that people are going, what about Hernandez, you hypocrite? And I mean left and right, guys. Now it says cocaine importation Really? Like, this is where we are? Where's the fentanyl? Oops, I guess we just pretended that's not the case anymore because you knew it wasn't real. Yes. Or on top of the fact that even cocaine is pretty minimal from Venezuela. Again, as I've said every time, even though now they're a little bit more odds with Colombia, that Colombia and through neighboring countries is the vast majority of the world's cocaine distribution, and they've worked with them forever. They don't care. But then, get this, guys. Possession of machine guns and destructive devices? What are we? So what? You're not allowed to have guns? That's not real, guys. This is them flimsily pointing to some U.S. law to claim that somehow that he's responsible. I mean, this is absolutely conjured. The conspiracy to possess machine guns and destructive devices against the United States. So wouldn't that be like literally every yeah, exactly. So wait for they're going to go after any other country. Guess what? Cuba, Mexico, you're next. And they're actually talking about that. They will soon face the full wrath of American justice on American soil in American courts. Okay, that's insane. It doesn't make any sense. On behalf of the entire U.S. DOJ, I would like to thank President Trump, always, right? You're so great, Trump, and you did it all. We're all behind you, because she's right now in the crosshairs. And a huge thank you to our brave military who conducted the incredible, highly successful mission. Okay. Natalie rightly says, you guys seriously captured and arrested a president in another country before arresting anyone on the Epstein list? Or how about anyone in general? How about anybody? How about any of the Democrat claims, Social Security, Doge money fraud? I mean, everything. What about the Somali daycares? What about all these stories and everything we've been told? And this is what we get. How is this America first? Even if you believe this is the best thing for America, wouldn't America first be like, I don't know, maybe America stuff first? Maybe. People see it, guys. Patrick Henningsen rightly says, make no mistake. What the Trump administration has done here is not judicial or legal by any U.S. or international standard. It's so easy to verify, but so too have been most of the lies they've spun this last administration. He says it is extraordinary rendition, a neocon policy requiring no real evidence other than innuendo and fabricated intelligence, which the U.S. never presented. On top of that, which is crazy. Even now, nothing, because they don't have anything, guys. And I agree with him. That's what he's saying. I'm just adding, guys. This was an illegal operation to abduct a head of state in order to steal a country's sovereign assets, namely oil. Now, I still don't know if that makes sense to me, but that does seem to be what's focused on. We're going to make points about the other stuff too. But it's just blatant. I mean, remember Trump was the one who authorized the illegal assassination of Soleimani under the guise of diplomacy in an international airport in Iraq. And if you still don't understand what Somali was and was not, it's just, these things continue to be the most obvious parts of the conversation. Just like, so he fought back against illegal invasion of Iraq and makes him a terrorist. And ultimately was responsible for the predominant attacks and removal of ISIS, which the U.S. and Israel have always supported and lied about. Most certainly, it says, in order to capture Maduro, the Trump administration threatened to inflict more damage on Caracas, potentially risking lives of thousands of Venezuelans. And we're going to get to that. It does seem that people were killed. They're lying about that, it seems. And it says, a common Israeli tactic of intimidation, total lawlessness. Or as George Galloway, I think, at least in my experience, coined, rampant lawlessness. I think it's an important thing to think about. Anybody could have put those two words together, but when he said it, it really kind of rang true for me at the time, and it still does. It's just rampant, use his word too. What did you say? What was it? Total. But there's another word I was thinking of. But just the point is that it's just sort of this all-encompassing, as he points out, almost deliberately belligerent to scare people away. It's, it's exactly a good overlap. It's what Trump does in his everyday policy. Scorched earth. Right? You say something about me, I'm going to sue you for no reason. Even though I'm going to lose, I'll still waste a lot of your money. It's the game they play. It is belligerent. It goes on to say, all this will eventually come out in future, maybe years from now. Why would any government trust the U.S. now? Because they fear them? Because they fear them? This is so pathetic. We are now officially a throwback regime. Right? I mean, and then think about the overlap to the government point in general. And I'm going to come back to this in a second, but why this set a dangerous precedent. Okay, under this logic, the point is that we argue he violated this or he lied about that we want this, or that Iranians called for it, or in the Venezuelan sense that Venezuelans wanted it, which is also being pointed out. So let's just say everybody in Iran said, we want you to arrest Donald Trump because he's a war criminal. And so they go and arrest him. And let's just even say they bring him to an international court. Is that now okay? Well, in essence, arguably, that would be the way that should go down. But the idea that it's just this unilateral action from one actor should not be the way that happens. I meant more of the sense of bringing a criminal to international court, like Netanyahu, for example. But the logic of the argument they're making then opens that door, right? What if everybody in the Palestinian Authority, which is a better way to frame it than Hamas, but they're not really on the side of Palestinians, but just to make the point. What if they decided, what if everybody in Gaza was saying, go arrest Netanyahu? And what if then the Palestinian Authority said, we're going to go arrest Netanyahu because everybody called for it? You see, this is the lazy kind of logic they put forward that people choose to point to. Chris Martinson says this has to be parody. The point about possession of machine guns. She goes, on what planet does the U.S. get to charge someone in another country for violating the U.S.'s own unconstitutional machine gun laws? These people are cartoons of themselves. It's the idea. So now it's the unconstitutional law that Republicans don't support is now being used to arrest other government. This is so clumsy and absolutely illegal and should bother mostly Republicans, in my opinion, for the way that they're doing this. Thomas Massey says, if this action were constitutionally sound, the attorney general wouldn't be tweeting that they've arrested the president on a sovereign country and his wife for possessing guns in violation of a 1934 U.S. firearm law. You see, I don't even understand. Like, to me, I don't know if maybe she thought that was savvy or maybe somebody else gave her that and she is not in control. It's embarrassing. And I think they know that. Now, Massey also points out, Attorney General Bondi and others legally characterized attack in Venezuela as arrest with military support. Meanwhile, Trump announces he's taken over the country and will run it until he finds someone suitable. We're going to go through this. Added bonus says American oil companies will get to exploit the oil. He says Trump also announced he's ready to attack Venezuela military with a second wave if needed, contradicting what people like Mike Lee and the rest are parroting. That's over now. It was only about getting him out of the way. It was only laying cover to get Maduro. Nope, not the case. Just like we see that in Syria or anywhere else. Now you're going to see Israel swing in the background. They're going to continue to do the same things they're doing everywhere else. But that's my opinion. But overall, the point was they're going to probably continue these actions because it's not about just getting Maduro or putting people in power that'll support democracy. It's about controlling the resources, as they're not even hiding right now. But he says it doesn't seem the least bit consistent with the earlier characterization by Bondi. It doesn't. And I think I have this coming up. We'll come back to this one. I have it up here in a second, but here's Mike Lee making the point about, I look forward to learning why this is constitutional and then just immediately going, oh, because they can. He's such a clown. All these people are just blind followers, but want to feign what they know people want to hear. That, wait a minute, that's not legal. Alan McLeod rightly points out, last night's attack on Venezuela fits into a long history of brazen U.S. interventions in Latin America and the world. Here's just the meme, as you can see, from 52 forward. It's just relentless, guys. Relentless. Every country, Cuba, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, Panama, Haiti, Peru, Dominican Republic, Venezuela, Bolivia, Paraguay, Brazil, Chile, Argentina, Uruguay, and then Honduras again. And then, it just never stops. And always a different narrative. Fruit companies then, now freedom, democracy, but none of those, the fruit company point was that was what happened, but ultimately that was not publicly accepted or known back then. Now we can look back and see that, but today they have a narrative. Censored Humans makes a good point. Iraq, December 2003 on the left, Saddam Hussein, Venezuela, Maduro on the right. When the United States can't control a nation, it simply criminalizes its leader. Now, that doesn't mean that they're not criminals, you understand? But it turns them into something like with Saddam Hussein, as I've made this point about almost every one of the big boogeyman of the U.S. government. Osama bin Laden, Saddam Hussein. I mean, you could even make points about Gaddafi, by the way, but that's a different conversation. My point is that these, specifically Saddam Hussein and Osama bin Laden, they worked with the U.S. government. You can prove this, as I make the point every time. The Washington Post, I think I always do that. I think it's a mainstream platform. For some reason, I think the Washington Post makes, we'll skip that. The point is, in mainstream media, it was covered quite clearly. They called Osama bin Laden a warrior of peace. I'm pretty sure at the Washington Post, but something jumped into my head right there. But I remember last time going, oh, wait, it was the Washington Times or whatever it was. The point is, it's provable that they referred to him as a warrior of peace because he was not seen at that time as the thing that he became or that they cultivated him into. So how do we make sense of that? That he's supposed, Osama bin Laden was the biggest terror, or Saddam Hussein was the reason we needed to invade. And these were their people until suddenly they weren't. They literally gave him chemical weapons to fight against Iran, Saddam Hussein. And then the point is, he suddenly didn't really go along with the agenda anymore, so they got rid of him. There's nothing sacred to these people. You are always useful. You're expendable. So his point is that they always do this when they need to, and it's not, and almost every time, literally in my experience, every time, the people that they change, or rather the situation that comes in, is way worse, especially for the people of these countries. As Gen X Girl writes, Donald Trump is no different than the warmongers he claims to hate. Bush, Noriega. I mean, it's all pretty much who I'm just listing off. This is the same. What's the point she's making is that right now they're always talking about, the neocons are bad. Trump was just talking bad about neocons, which they are. They're ridiculous. They're all crazy. But same with all of them. Neo-libs are, the whole point is the government are pretty much in the same boat for me with different flavorings. But you need to understand that this is identical. Like I'm trying to point out about left and right, or the larger globalist agenda, or whatever, the technology, it's basically the same direction with a different justification, a different window dressing, but if you stand back and really look, as I've shown you over the years, it just continues. The main agenda just never stops. This is a good clip.
As president, I have no higher obligation than to safeguard the lives of American citizens. And that is why I directed our armed forces to protect the lives of American citizens in Panama and to bring General Noriega to justice in the United States.
Good afternoon. Yesterday, December the 13th, at around 8:30 p.m. Baghdad time, United States military forces captured Saddam Hussein alive. He was found near a farmhouse outside the city of Tikrit in a swift raid conducted without casualties.
Wow. Huh. Unconfirmed. Yeah. Unconfirmed. No. Unconfirmed reports about Gaddafi being captured.
And of unconfirmed reports.
Yes, we came, we saw, he died.
And now it's just showing his post. America has successfully carried out a large-scale strike. Right? I mean, how is that any different? Just important to see that that this is the same thing. He pretends he resists, but he doesn't really. Here is a post from Holden Kulata, and it's posting. This is actually from December 17th, but Massey is making some pretty good points about this. But it says Massey's going, and he is really now and before, going nuclear on Trump's regime change war in Venezuela. Basically the points we would all make. How did it work out for Cuba, Libya, Iraq, Syria? Those points never seem to get made by any side, even though they could be using it to make Trump look bad, but they don't because they're all on the same side. Do we want another Afghanistan? I'll let you listen to it, but he's as usual, making good points.
Speaker, James Madison warned us that in no part of the Constitution is more wisdom to be found than in the clause which confides the question of war and peace to the legislature and not the executive. Madison called it the crown jewel of Congress. The framers understood a simple truth. To the extent that war-making power devolves to one person, liberty dissolves. If the president believes military action against Venezuela is justified and needed, he should make the case and Congress should vote before American lives and treasure are spent on regime change in South America. Let's be honest about likely outcomes. Do we truly believe that Nicolas Maduro will be replaced by a modern-day George Washington? How did that work out? In Cuba, Libya, Iraq, or Syria, previous presidents told us to go to war.
And to be clear, in my opinion, that wasn't some accidental screw-up. The plan was to feign the positive and really just exploit everything they possibly can, and then create destabilization for their further exploitation as long as they can. That's what they do all around the world, guys.
For WMDs, weapons of mass destruction that did not exist. Now it's the same playbook, except we're told that drugs are the WMDs. If it were about drugs, we'd bomb Mexico or China or Colombia, and the president would not have pardoned Juan Orlando Hernandez. This is about oil and regime change. And when it comes to regime change, we've already been down this road with Venezuela with nothing to show for it. In 2019, we recognized Juan Guaido. We seized their embassy here in D.C. We were told that regime change was imminent. Years later, Maduro remains in power. Today, we're told to place our hopes in other exiled figures. Edmundo Gonzalez and Maria Corina Machado. I wish them well, I do. But Congress should not express moral sympathy in the form of a blank check for military escalation and American lives. And let's take a moment to acknowledge the contradiction at the heart of this policy. This administration tells us that the Maduro regime is made up of narco-terrorists, and by escalating toward war, we would predictably create countless refugees. At the same time, this administration has moved to end temporary protected status for hundreds of thousands of Venezuelans and deports them back to the very regime it condemns. So which is it? Are we prepared to receive swarms of the 25 million Venezuelans who will likely become refugees and billions in American treasure that will be used to destroy and inevitably rebuild that nation? Do we want a miniature Afghanistan in the Western Hemisphere? If that cost is acceptable to this Congress, then we should vote on it as a voice of the people and in accordance with our Constitution. And yet today, here we aren't even voting on whether to declare war or authorize the use of military force. All we're voting on is a war powers resolution that strengthens the fabric of our republic by reasserting the plain and simple language in the Constitution that Congress must decide questions of war. I urge support for this resolution, and I yield back.
Same old thing, guys. I mean, really take a second and think about how crazy that is. Even if you disagree with it, these are supposed to be the guiding policy principles, the shall not be infringed reality. But they don't even care. And not only do they not care, the party on the other side that's supposed to be the other power doesn't care to call it out. They just all let it keep going because no one's actually fighting this. Now, whether you think it's only about Israel or whatever else it is, you can decide that. But you need to be honest about what that just showed. It's just, there's no, what he's simply saying is you can do all the things you claim you're doing, but go through the right channels. That's not what he's saying. But the argument being, if you're going to do this, come into Congress, have a vote about it. I would even argue that most of them would probably vote to do it, but they don't want this because that's a legal channel. But and it's quite obvious that they have been convinced in some ways that they have this kind of unilateral power over everything, but has zero connection with the ideas they push about what this country is. Right? Freedom and democracy and liberty, but then I can do whatever I want. It's pretty stupid, but people seem to buy it right now. But we're going to, the general point about the election, as we've talked about when it happened, let's not forget, guys, it's pretty obvious, like it's been almost every single time, that there is an undeniable, like we're seeing in Iran and like we're seeing in Honduras or saw, Western manipulation on the face. Trump at the easy level, Trump and Elon Musk screaming about things or do this or put them in power. There's going to be trouble. That's obvious manipulation. But then within that, like actual on the ground psychological operations, intelligence operations, Israel, the United States, it's obvious. And then you can still prove that he didn't even lose the election. And the independent observers can quite clearly show you, but they don't care about that. Like they didn't care Bolivia. They don't care anywhere. And it's so obvious. And that's not to say support government or Maduro or any of it. It's just, I support the reality of the facts. And so here he is calling it all out. And it's funny how he's the traitor. He's the un-American one, Trump will tell you. Now, here's Marjorie Taylor Greene, another example of that. She says, I've served on the Homeland Security Committee for the past 3 years. I'm 100% for strong, safe, secure borders and stopping narco-terrorists and cartels from trafficking deadly drugs and human trafficking into America. Fentanyl is responsible for over 70% of the U.S. drug overdose deaths. That's why they use that term, because they wanted you to think that they were responsible for all of this, and I guess weren't smart enough to think that we couldn't just look at the facts. And it says, and fentanyl comes from Mexican cartels. The same cartels, by the way, that they work with, as I've shown you 100 times over. For example, like this one right here, the wiretap. The DEA laundered $19 million of cartel money into cash and crypto. August 19th, 2025. That was literally the Mexican cartels. You can't even make this stuff up. It's so embarrassing. And it says, where was I? 70% of the drug overdose deaths and fentanyl come from Mexican cartels made with chemical precursors from China, as I often point out, and trafficked across the U.S.-Mexico border. Mexican cartels are primarily and overwhelmingly responsible for killing Americans with deadly drugs. That I see. And again, they're responsible for drugs. Whether or not something hurt, that's you who put it in your body. That framing is why I doubt her sincerity in a lot of ways, but maybe she just doesn't see that that's wrong, or, that every Democrat's a terrorist, as she's basically insinuated recently. But continuing, I support what she's saying here. If U.S. military action and regime change in Venezuela was really about saving American lives from deadly drugs, then why hasn't the Trump administration taken action against Mexican cartels? Probably because in large ways they actually work with these groups. So too does Israel. You can quite literally look up studies and documents and, same old, right? If prosecuting narco terrorists is a high priority, then why did President Trump pardon former Honduran President Juan Orlando Hernandez, who was convicted and sentenced for 45 years for trafficking hundreds of tons of cocaine into America? Ironically, cocaine is the same drug that Venezuela primarily traffics to the United States, but in the global conversation, it's a small amount. The next obvious observation is that by removing Maduro, this is a clear move for control over Venezuelan oil supplies that will ensure stability for the next obvious regime change in war in Iran. See, so it's funny, I was on the other side of it. They're claiming they did this to help, basically stop Maduro from fleeing to Iran, when what she's claiming is sort of the opposite, that they went after Maduro because they needed to do this in order to go after Iran next, which is just exactly what this is coordinated. And you people in our government who were 30 seconds ago on his side telling you what they're really doing. This is why average Republicans are very much aware of what's happening. They're in a desperate kind of tailspin right now, trying to hide things from everybody. And what was the other point? Well, continuing, it says, and of course, why is it okay for America to militarily invade, bomb, and arrest a foreign leader, but Russia is evil for invading Ukraine, and China is bad for aggression against Taiwan? See, you can argue both are bad, but the consistency is lacking for people. If you're going to make you can't say, well, we're the good guy. That's not a legal standing. The action is a crime or not. If you're claiming you can't unilaterally invade a country because of narrative, then you can't either. They do it, though. They all do. It is only okay if we do it, she says. I'm not endorsing Russia or China. She says regime change, funding foreign wars, and Americans' tax dollars being consistently funneled to foreign causes, foreigners both home and abroad, and foreign governments, while Americans are consistently facing increasing costs of living, housing, healthcare, and learn about scams and fraud of their tax dollars, is what has most Americans enraged. See, this is infuriating their administration right now, because she's just calling it all out. The idea of them literally funding the foreigners they claim are only Democrats, like, this is a bigger conversation. And she goes on to say, especially the younger generations, boomers and half of Gen X will cheer on neocon wars and talking points. But the other half of Gen X and a majority on down see through it and hate it. That's the majority, she's saying. I agree. Americans disgust with our government's never-ending military aggression, which is why Trump pretended he was going to stop that, and support of foreign wars is justified because I said that sounded weird so Americans' disgust with our government's never-ending military aggression and support of foreign wars is justified because we are forced to pay for it. And both parties, Republicans and Democrats, always keep the Washington military machine funded and going. So, this is why I'm on the fence, because that's a very important point to make. And I'm glad she's making it. I always keep the door open for the fact that maybe she just doesn't see a part of the story, or maybe that I'm wrong and she's got the right correction part. The point is, what she's saying there is important. And it goes on to say, this is why many in MAGA thought they voted to end, or what they thought they would end. But boy, were we wrong. As the baby boomers slip away, both in votes and power, the electoral future will be decided for candidates that focus on American economic populism, and promising prosperity for Americans only. As of right now, neither party is offering a solution. That's really upsetting them. So the Sirius report, Catherine Austin Fitz, says Washington commits war crimes in Venezuela. And you can watch the bombing campaign. It's quite wild, actually. That's actually a smaller version of it. And she says this is an act of total desperation, and precisely because the U.S. is teetering on the edge of economic and financial ruin. See, you're not hearing this part of the conversation almost anywhere. That's what I keep talking about in a larger sense, not even just economically. I also agree. I think they're desperate as hell, but people don't seem to think that's the case. Their actions, I think, belie that reality. But here, she's saying from an economic perspective that the U.S. government is teetering on financial collapse. I would trust more than anybody in the conversation when she says something about finances. It's something we should listen to. And I think that may be part of what's happening here, on top of the rare earth minerals and other, but it's maybe just about money, or on top of other things, right? But as Jeff Carlson rightly points out, here's Fox News saying, Fox News pundit says the unconfirmed U.S. invasion of Venezuela, as it was unconfirmed when this first got posted, for national security against Hezbollah and Iran, as well as Russia and China. Yeah, why throw it all in for good measure, right? Who cares? Well, as Jeff rightly points out, I'm sure it's just coincidence that less than 4 days ago, Netanyahu said exactly the same thing while he was visiting Trump at Mar-a-Lago. You must realize how consistently this happens. He visits, he states things, and then they let a couple days pass and they come out and go, we have an idea, and this is what we think. And it's identical to what Israel was laying out.
Venezuela, they're in cahoots with the Maduro regime. They're exporting terrorism to America, to the American hemisphere, and then they want these Hezbollah and Hamas to get their guys into the United States. So Hamas and Iran's and its proxies are a threat not only to us, but to Israel, all America's allies in the Middle East, and to America itself.
Always the same narrative. Just never stops, right? I mean, and this is exactly what they tried to do with the overlap to Gaza. Hamas is coming for you next, right? Or literally tried that, by the way, if I can bring that up. No, that's not the one. Oh, interesting. That's Operation Ajax. I forget what the title was. Anyway, the article, if I remember to grab it, if I remember what it is, I'll bring it in the show notes. Remember, it was the guy who came through the border who Republicans all freaked out about, going, he said he was Palestinian and you'll know my name soon. Remember that story? And then when it very quickly came out that he was actually a Jordanian who worked with Mossad, funny how the story just went away. Because the whole thing was about making it about Hamas is secretly coming in through immigration, kind of jamming together both those narratives. And this just never stops. It doesn't work out. And so they deflect and they move on. And so he has been trying to cultivate this narrative the entire time, while very much cultivating the weaponized immigration into this country. Trump says Venezuela's Maduro captured after strike. So let's get into the general reporting. This is from the 3rd today. The United States attacked Venezuela and captured its long-serving president, Nicolas Maduro, in an overnight operation on Saturday. U.S. President Donald Trump said, promising to put the country under American control for now. Yeah, I'll show you the clips. He actually said that. How does that possibly line up with any law, anywhere, including by deploying U.S. forces if necessary? Oh, great. So boots on the ground, as he says. I think it was right in here. Or it's another article. Oh, it's right there. I'll come back to it. We're not afraid of boots on the ground. It's clear that that's something like that's usually not what American politicians say, right? That they almost pretend like we're not going to do that, or it's only a supplementary support force. Now he's just going, yeah, we're not afraid. We're going to go in. Wonder what's driving that forceful action. And it goes on to say, we're going to run the country, direct quote, until such time as we can do a safe, proper, judicious transition. So pretty much never, because they'll never allow that. This is an excuse to maintain control, which is what they always do anyway. Just like most of the things happening right now, they're just kind of coming right out and going down, screw it, we're going to control it. Before, we used to pretend we weren't by letting somebody else pass, but now we're just going to control it. He just says the loud, quiet part out loud. There is no legal reality there, guys. It's not how that works. Trump said during a press conference, he says, we can't take a chance that someone else takes over Venezuela who doesn't have the interest of Venezuelans in mind. Well, gee, you know what might help that, seeing as how you in control, you could let them vote for it. But even that is obviously controlled by them, as they've shown you time and again. But he's not even playing that game. We want Venezuelans to have their interest at heart, so we're going to control what happens. It's just lazy. And I can't really tell you why, because they could have easily cobbled together a more consistent narrative that more people would have bought. But my thoughts on what's driving a lot of this, and a lot of that I think is about actually destabilizing this country too. What it says, it is unclear how Trump plans to oversee Venezuela, despite a dramatic overnight operation that knocked out electricity in parts of Caracas, which he brags about. A cyber attack on top of everything else. It's just showing you what's really going on and what has always been going on. And capture Maduro in or near one of his safe houses. U.S. forces have no control over the country itself, and Maduro's government appears not only to still be in charge, but to have no appetite for cooperating with Washington, even though Trump lied about that. literally said, we're working with the vice president. She just came out going, Zionists took over the country. I'll show you that in a second. But think about that. So you effectively are pretending to control the country when it seems that the government, which is like what happened last time, except they went the other route, right? Remember, they got really embarrassed by this. They were basically setting up a regime change, had deals, background with generals and people in the military, and executed it. And it turned out they were being played. And that all those generals, right as they were supposed to take over, we did a press conference with Maduro and said, we're not this, they lied, they did this, and they just kind of pulled away and fell into the background. And that was pretty embarrassing for them. So instead of going, we're going to work with them to get Maduro, we're just going to remove Maduro. That's what they did this time. No, but what's clear is it does seem that they had inside help to do this. But just like Robert was covering about Iran, that and actually in both conversations, in Iran, the point was that you can see past and this last kind of iteration of what's happening, that Iranian assets that were Israeli assets were in Iran. So it's the same conversation. I'm willing to bet you that they've just been cultivating intelligence assets on the ground in order to carry these things out, but does not translate to support of the people or even the entire government. So they do not have charge in control of the country, and it seems the government does not want to cooperate. So you're right back to square one, right? You don't have control. You can't put someone in power. All you did was get Maduro out of the way. Maybe that was meant to scare people into place. And again, this can flesh out differently over the next couple of days. This is what we have access to right now. It says Maduro's apparent successor, Venezuelan Vice President Delcy Rodriguez, appeared on Venezuelan television Saturday afternoon, flanked by other top officials to decry what she called a kidnapping. That's what it was. Quote, we demand the immediate release of Nicolas Maduro and his wife. They called Maduro the only president of Venezuela. Maduro is expected to make an initial appearance in Manhattan federal court. This always seems so ridiculous to me. According to a Justice Department official, that's what you would call a kangaroo court. Like the idea that you're just going to bring him in and just like it's going to be an honestly engaged situation. Like, why would that judge be like, yes, this makes sense? We can clearly use U.S. law to charge him with things overseas. No judge should realistically take that seriously. Maybe that won't happen. But it says Rodriguez spoke shortly after Trump, who was flanked by senior U.S. officials, including Marco Rubio, Hegseth, and his administration had been in touch with her, and that she appeared cooperative, noting that she really doesn't have a choice. So he lied about that, because right after that, they came out and said, no, we're not. That's not true. And so he, I think, was trying to force that in and saying you don't have a choice, maybe scaring her. I don't know. But that's not the case. That shows a vulnerable situation to me. They're not in control. At his press conference, Trump did not provide specific answers to repeated questions about how the U.S. proposed to take over and run Venezuela, saying that, quote, the people that are standing right behind me, Hegseth, Rubio, would oversee the country. Oh, that's fantastic. Rubio, Narco Rubio and Hegseth, the Zionists, are both really are going to be controlling Venezuela. Do you know how long Rubio's been trying to make this happen? They don't care. They've been hurting Venezuelans their entire career. And he says, we're not afraid of boots on the ground. Well, you sure as hell promised that wasn't going to happen. Trump's comments about an open-ended military presence in Venezuela echoed the rhetoric around past invasions in Iraq and Afghanistan, right? Both of which ended in American withdrawals after years of costly occupation and thousands of U.S. casualties, except they didn't withdraw from those countries. That's just what mainstream media tells you. They're obviously, I can't even believe they would argue they withdrew from Iraq. Now, maybe in regard to some kind of a military active front, but there's military bases. They're actively in Iraq. But Afghanistan, we just talked about the base. Trump even just let that out of the bag. Going, we're going to get the base back. They never left. Not in earnest, whether we're talking about mercenary types or actual people, which both exist, in my opinion, they never left. But the point was costly invasions that led to U.S. casualties. He said on Saturday that as president, including in his first term, he has overseen, of course he says this because what else is he going to do? He's overseen military actions that were only victories. Okay. I'd love to know what your only victories were. Better yet, I'd love to know how you think that you have not failed in any possible way, despite repeated failures, even according to your own people, or that your military actions, I mean, even with the Iran conversation, do you realize that if you look at the evidence, they completely did not accomplish what they claimed? And Iran demonstrated how much they were superior in regard to Israel. That was very easy to prove, but they just came out and were like, we did it all, we win. They do it every time. But it's like him saying he's stopped 7 wars. I mean, you've bombed 7 countries. Maybe you got those confused. It's just so lazy, but people repeat it. But it says, but none of those involved removing another country's leader. Trump in the past criticized such interventions, calling the Iraq invasion a big fat mistake during a 2016 presidential debate and saying in 2021 that he was, quote, especially proud to be the first president in decades who has started no new wars. That wasn't true then. I made the point then. It's definitely not true now. As U.S. occupation won't cost us a penny, he says, because the United States would be reimbursed from the money coming from the ground, resources, which that means that Venezuelans won't benefit from their resources, that you're going to take that to reimburse your illegal war. So how are you framing this as in the Venezuelan interest? You see how easy this is to point out? And it says that he referred to the Venezuelan oil reserves, a subject he returned to repeatedly during his press conference. I'll show you some clips to all this stuff. The idea that Reuters writes, the idea that a country's oil reserves can pay for an American invasion, which, by the way, is just dystopian as hell, also recalls 2003 Iraq War, the one Trump always criticizes. In the run up to the invasion, U.S. officials repeatedly stated that the cost would largely be covered by Iraq's assets. Remember that? Including its oil. Various estimates by academics say the actual cost to the United States of its years-long entanglement to Iraq ended up being about $2 trillion. There's no difference to what we're talking about today. It's going to end up the same way if we allow this to happen. And here's the point, guys. If you understand this, that $2 trillion went to benefit these people and their inner circles and their companies and their investments. That's why what he means is we will benefit and we will get, not you though, your tax dollars will go to pay for this stuff while they enrich themselves at the expense of everybody. It says who the U.S. planned to cooperate with in Venezuela was not made clear. Trump publicly closed the door, interestingly enough, which I don't believe is actually closed, with working with the opposition leader, Maria Corina Machado, the one who literally wrote a letter in 2018 to Netanyahu saying, please regime change Venezuela. It's public. And has been like, Israel all the way. I'll show you some points in a second. And widely seen as Maduro's most credible opponent. Trump said the United States has not been in contact with the Nobel Peace Prize laureate. That's insane. She doesn't have the support within the country or the respect within the country, Trump said. Trump's comment outraged some supporters of this is so classic for him. Like, you didn't need to say that, right? You could have made a different argument and kept that support from people you've been manipulating. But she said, or maybe the point is that she will be in power. This is meant to gaslight. I don't know. Trump's comment outraged those supporters who have voiced support for U.S. actions because they thought she'd be in power. This is like leaning into Ron Paul Massey in order to trick Republicans to think he'll do good things. It's what they do. And it says, and who has voiced support for U.S. action to fight alleged drug trafficking and who dedicated her Nobel Prize to Trump and the Venezuelan people. Just absolutely insane. Okay. So a couple important points off this stuff and some videos for you to watch. Declassified UK says, did you know, and it's important to understand why this is important, the Bank of England, and we talked about this at the time, froze $2 billion of Venezuelan gold to support the U.S. effort to oust Nicolas Maduro, which even to this very point has only resulted in him being removed, and eventually we'll see what happens, but the power structure is still there. It says the UK government has been supporting regime change efforts in Venezuela for years. What do you think that did to the country? In conjunction with aggressive sanctions to support or to collapse your economy, guys. You steal $2 billion of your base assets and then sanction them into the ground and then claim they can't manage their economy. It's always like the same with Iran. It's just very easy to prove. Now, here's what Trump said about the cutting of the power, which I think is important is to realize that this is something they brag about, and this is a crime. I mean, everything is because of the way they're doing this, but it also shows you they've been doing this for a long time, affecting their power. Remember when they have big power outages, they go, look, they can't manage this. This is what they're doing. And he's just bragging about it.
All Venezuelan military capacities were rendered powerless as the men and women of our military working with U.S. law enforcement successfully captured Maduro in the dead of night. It was dark.
By the way, isn't it just funny when he's reading something that somebody prepared for him and then he just decides to riff for a second, and it's always so disjointed. And it's so clear that he just, he does this when he's talking in speeches, and it's almost always the same kind of rambling, repeating, circling back point that really isn't about the main conversation, and then kind of pivots into praising himself to something that's not related. It's like the same old cycle. But I just think it's funny that he goes off on this point, which seems like he wasn't supposed to say what he said right here. but he just couldn't help himself.
Successfully, military capacities were rendered powerless as the men and women of our military working with U.S. law enforcement successfully captured Maduro in the dead of night. It was dark. The lights of Caracas were largely turned off due to a certain expertise that we have.
It's just hilarious to me. Struggling through, well, I guess I got to finish the sentence now. I already started it. Yeah, so you guys did that, right? Which is not really being hidden. It's just funny the way that it's not, that was written differently, clearly. And it was dark. The lights were out. It's weird. And I think the point was he says this in, like, he made that same statement later in Fox News and Friends, and, you know, it got dark and like he based the point. Anyway, it's not worth even getting too far into. It's funny the way he does this. And what he says is kind of about how it's also everywhere. You know, it's weird. It is a weird point. But continuing, here is a clip. Oh, excuse me, this one first. And this is Camilla saying overnight images of Fuerte Tijuana, headquarters of the Venezuelan Ministry of Defense, and this news contributor from Caracas. These images only recently arrived because of the internet phone and power outages. And so this is the point to make, is that the reason they do this in many cases, or often, is to make sure that you can't put out good information about what they're doing on the ground. So they can control the narrative because no information's coming out from people with phones and whatever else. It says that they described that residents of Caracas awoke to tremors and loud noises around 2 a.m., with the most intense air attacks lasting approximately an hour. So explain to me how that's supposed to be light cover to get Maduro out, which is what they frame it as. They bombed intensively and apparently killed people. I mean, this is Israeli tactics as far as I'm concerned. The area was without power and a near total darkness. The sky was filled with gray clouds and smoke and fire. Also showed this footage. They have a residential area for civilians made up of dozens of buildings separated from the base by a security checkpoint. There were also victims in this U.S. terror attack. Drop Site News reports, and this is what I was saying earlier, that Reuters reports that that Maduro was captured in an operation involving U.S. Special Forces, Delta Force, assistance from the CIA inside Maduro's inner circle, they claim, and cooperation from members of the Venezuelan military. Now, that doesn't seem to be the case right now with what's happening, but it's hard to tell. According to the U.S. officials and people, of course, according to them, a source close to Venezuelans' opposition described the move as an inside job. Now, that seems to, I mean, I don't know how else that would happen the way it did, but arguing that there's like high-level people, it could be, and they're just keeping themselves secret. I'm not sure how it wouldn't be known, but overall, with what you're going to see from the vice president, it seems like they're not in control. Now, here he is talking about who will control it. I just think it's important to hear him say these things, and it's pointing to the sociopathic failures behind him.
Venezuelan military capacities were rendered powerless as the men and women of our military working with U.S. law enforcement successfully captured Maduro in the dead of night. It was dark.
Oh, sorry. Maybe I didn't remove that. It's this one.
We're going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition. So we don't want to be involved with having somebody else get in, and we have the same situation that we had for the last long period.
My point again, that's him riffing off the back of the statement. You're not supposed to say that, Trump, because that's illegal. Even though everything you're doing is illegal, you're trying to present it as some kind of a semblance of credibility. You don't do, well, we're just going to hold off on their democratic process until we feel good about what's happening. That's what he does.
Of years. So we are going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition. And it has to be judicious because that's what we're all about.
I'm not going to keep commenting on. Yeah, somebody in chat goes, he seems bored. Like it's weird the way he's conducting himself. Like almost maybe like he's not making his own choices. That's kind of the feeling I get a lot of times, right? Here, Glenn Greenwald rightly points out, Trump announces that the U.S. will run Venezuela for the time being, leaving his poor supporters to try to pretend that this is somehow even remotely reconcilable with anything he said he would do during the 2024 campaign. Yeah, exactly.
Would run Venezuela?
Well, it's largely going to be, for a period of time, the people that are standing right behind me. We're going to be running it. We're going to be bringing it back. It's a dead, I talk about a dead country.
You see, this is what they do. Talking about Haiti or anywhere else, ignoring for the fact that, first of all, it's not a dead country, but that it's completely where it is in almost every way because of what they're doing. That's not to say that Maduro is completely innocent of any crime or that they're not enriching themselves in plenty of ways. I argue the opposite. The point, though, is that what you're pointing to with the collapse of the economy, with almost every major claim you're making, you guys have cultivated. In other ways, you've even bragged about that. But here we are. Great. I'm sure glad Rubio is going to be controlling. You think they're going to support people in Venezuela? They've been calling these people terrible things for their entire careers, other than people they work with. Let's not forget, by the way, that Rubio even brought in some of these Venezuelan opposition people, and then they were later deported by Donald Trump. It's just silly. Here is Rubio, or rather saying people, at the same clip, people standing right behind me. Now here's Drop Site News pointing out Delcy Rodriguez, the president of Venezuela. And Venezuela's executive vice president, head of the Consejo de Defensa de la Nación, the National Defense Council, the nation's top civilian military coordination body. She declared, there is only one president in this country, and his name is Nicolas Maduro Moras. Now, this is exactly the opposite of what Trump just got done saying. And she was the only she was only acting as the executive authority in Maduro's absence. She added that Venezuela would only engage with the U.S. on terms of respect and within a framework of both international and Venezuelan law, stating that that is the only type of relationship I will accept after they have attacked and military assaulted our beloved nation. They're not going to do that. So explain for me how that this continues forward with that stance and them engaging the international community, that won't demonstrate the U.S. government's belligerence. I mean, this is what's going to happen. But they're going to keep forcing this in. What else are they going to do? On top of that, this clip, which you can translate for yourself, Venezuela's Vice President Delcy Rodriguez claims the country was attacked by Zionists seeking to enslave the nation. Now, I did double check this, looking up on multiple platforms, double checking with, you can ask Grok if you want. There's plenty of different ways to check this in regard to the translation, and I did. So the claim that she's saying Zionists were involved is real. I often am worried about that because there are plenty of manipulative platforms or accounts out there that love to sort of insert that even though it's not true, usually for the interest of the opposite side, right? But she's claiming that. Now, that's not hard to recognize, guys. As we just showed you, Netanyahu was out there telling you this is why that's going to happen. She insists Venezuela will ignore the Trump administration's instructions on who can become the next president. Obviously, Rodriguez says the entire country is mobilized and that Nicolas Maduro remains the legitimate leader. Now, Susan Abuhala, I always mispronounce that, Hawa, excuse me. In other words, she says the United States just invaded another sovereign nation and captured its elected head of state for Israel's benefit. It's no coincidence that this happened on the heels of Netanyahu's visit to the White House. The Zionist Federal Reserve will, which is the way she frames it, will print money to pay for all of this, which will raise inflation and cut the value of your savings in half. And that, fellow Americans, is how you are secretly taxed without even knowing in order to pay for Israel's wars. That's a very good point. Now, Camille also points out this is simply, maybe just for time, we'll just kind of, maybe I'll try to skim through it real quick. This is what Delcy Rodriguez said. In the face of this brutal situation and the brutal attack, we do not know the whereabouts of Maduro and the First Lady. We demand the government that Donald Trump immediately prove the life of Maduro and the First Lady. It's certainly possible they've been taken out. President Maduro has already been very clear and that we warned Venezuelan people that an aggression of this nature would take place. Now, this is important because this has been happening. He's been talking about this. So he's been getting ready, whatever's going on right now is what the argument is. And it's saying, driven by the desperation of the United States, energy, veracity, and I just jumped to the point. President Maduro has already been very clear and has warned that Venezuelan people, that an aggression of this nature, driven by the desperation of the United States, could occur. And the first thing Maduro told the people of Venezuela was, people to the streets, militia activated. See, isn't it funny? Militia, isn't that exactly, that's literally out of the U.S. Constitution, and that's the one thing our government doesn't allow, or one of the many things. But over here in this Venezuela dystopia, they're telling you the terrible people, they have allow civilian militias. Well, I take it back, actually. It's not, the reality is it's not individual civilian militias. It's actually coordinated through the government, but the point is still interesting, right? And it goes on to say, he gave very clear orders to the Bolivarian National Armed Forces so that in perfect military, popular, and police unity, all plans for the comprehensive defense of the nation would be activated. And they are thus activated with the decree that was signed by Nicolas Maduro, decreeing the external state of emergency. You can argue right now that they might be independent, seeing as how this seems to be up in limbo. But it says, we demand respect for international law. We condemn this brutal, savage form of aggression against our people, which has claimed the lives of military personnel who have become martyrs of our homeland, and which has claimed the lives of innocent Venezuelan civilians at different points of the attack. That's being pretty broadly claimed right now, even though Trump is lying and saying, or at least claiming the opposite. I believe the evidence shows that he's lying, that nobody was hurt, maybe some injuries, but this is what they do every time. It says people were killed, she says, both in the capital and the states of Aragua, Miranda, and the state of La Guaira. So the call is very clear, she says. The instructions of President Maduro have been given. The instructions of President Maduro are to immediately activate, and this is known by the Minister of Defense and everybody else. It is known by our Bolivarian National Forces. Where was it? That in perfect police, military, and popular unity, we go out and defend our homeland. So essentially that nothing's changed, that they are going to continue to, as the full force, defend their invasion. No one is going to violate the historical legacy of our liberating father, Simon Bolivar. Now, that's her opinion. It could be that this is her doing exactly what I said in the other side, projecting strength when maybe that's not true. It's worth considering. The people of Venezuela, in perfect national unity, must activate to defend their national resources, but must also activate to defend the most sacred thing a homeland can have, its right to independence, its right to the future, its right to have a free homeland without any kind of external tutelage, without being turned into anyone's colony. We will never be slaves. We are the sons and daughters of Bolivar. And once again, we demand, and these are my final words, we demand immediate proof of life of Nicolas Maduro and proof of life of his first lady. The first combatant, and a first lady. This is a very clear message for our homeland. It is very, very clear for our people. The president had already envisioned it this way because he knew what they were capable of, or what they are capable of when crossing these red lines. What they are capable of in threatening the territorial integrity of an independent and free country, of threatening the peace and tranquility of our people. And it is in all of us, in every one of us. And this is the call I make for the perfect national unity. All the living forces of Venezuelan society must activate to guarantee Venezuela's independence. Let no foreign government presume to give orders to Venezuela. Let no external government do so. So the New York Times is one of the places that's originally cited, coming from Venezuelan sources, but it's been continuing to be cited and grow even from the vice president. The U.S. attack has left an unspecified number of Venezuelans dead and injured. Venezuelan officials said in their statements the number of casualties still being assessed. Of course, Trump came out right away and said that that's not the case. 0 deaths, but tends to be, saying that so quickly, it feels like that was the narrative set, when almost likely that's the opposite, especially when you bomb the way that they did, which I'll show you an image. I doubt there were 0 deaths. It doesn't make much sense with what happened. Unless, of course, on top of the fact that, what about the military personnel? They're claiming they engaged to some degree, so maybe they're pretending they don't count as casualties. Now, J.D. Vance said, a PSA for everyone saying this was illegal, even though it's quite literally legal in every possible way. Maduro has multiple indictments in the United States for narco-terrorism. You don't get to avoid justice for drug trafficking in the United States because you live in places like Caracas. Think about what he's even saying right there. You're actually making the argument that nobody in the world, anywhere, that everyone everywhere is potentially to be captured and tried in the U.S. court for crimes of U.S. framing, no matter where you are in the world, no matter whether it affects the United States or not. That we can say you're a criminal, yes, and that's how the U.S. government has operated as long as I've ever been alive. And he just says that makes it not illegal? And rightly so. James Sears says this argument means that anytime a president wants, left or right, by the way, wants to invade a country, quote, legally, he just has to get his DOJ to indict the country's leader, which we know that's easily corruptible. And on top of the fact that indictment's basically an accusation. It says it makes Congress power to declare war meaningless, which is probably the point. But J.D. Vance is just a mindless follower like the rest. He knows that's illegal. They don't care. But so too do the rest of Congress, who also doesn't seem to care. Now, one thing, I think I already discussed this for the most part, but it's worth considering again. The idea that based on the logic they're laying out, okay, same point with the indictment. What happens if the Iranian government indicts Donald Trump for war crimes? Or how about Netanyahu, since it's obvious to everyone in the world that that's a war criminal, but it should be for Trump and Biden, same too. But let's say that they go through the legal check. They have a process. They indict him. They claim he's committing crimes he actually is. And then they unilaterally go in the dead of night and bomb the country and arrest Netanyahu and even bring him to international court. Would that be okay? I mean, think about it. If you're arguing this is okay, why would that be any different? Okay, let's just even say it's Germany. It's not the evil boogeyman you want to frame. Let's say it's the UK. What if they go in and arrest Donald Trump tonight and they bring him to a court, or they bring him back to the UK and say, you're a criminal, we're going to charge you? I mean, we should laugh out loud collectively about how everybody everywhere can recognize that that's not real. That is a complete framing. That means you can do anything you want, wherever you want, at any time. And that's obviously what they're actually saying. So on that very note about the legalities of this from international law, here's an article from Just Security. Maduro capture operation and the president's duty to faithfully execute the UN Charter. Now, whatever you think about the UN or the Charter, it's about legal reality, right? This is about, and on top of the fact that the U.S. is a part of that and has many times over, even Trump's administration endorsed, generally speaking, these ideas. International law, they often use that against Iran or anybody else, right? It's clear. So in the operation to abduct Nicolas Maduro, the Trump administration reportedly relied on a highly controversial 1989 legal memorandum. A legal memorandum, really? Claiming that President Donald Trump or anybody else who is the president does not need to abide by the UN Charter or more specific or more, broadly international law as a matter of domestic law. Oh, interesting. I guess that's why Bondi was made to look stupid by claiming he violated some machine gun law from the United States in the 30s. So they can go domestic. It's domestic. It's not about you guys. So we don't have to worry about international law. I mean, guys, these guys are desperate, it seems, in using arguments that are objectively stupid, like with the bombing of these ships in the water, which I'll point to in a second. I mean, what else does that show you other than somebody else is doing this for the benefit of anything other than Americans or American interests? Everything they're doing is making them look worse and more stupid and more despotic, and I think that's by design. But it says, over the decades, the opinion generated sharp criticisms, including from Congress, and the Justice Department conspicuously avoided following its conclusions when presented the administration's positions in court. And it says, the Department of Justice's Office of Legal Counsel opinion, entitled The Authority of the Federal Bureau of Investigations to Override International Law in Extraterritorial Law Enforcement Activities. Talk about a self-serving framing, right? So it doesn't apply when we have an interest of going after somebody who's not in our country. It was signed by then Assistant Attorney General Bill Barr. I remember this, he's also very important in regard to the pre-crime dynamic and a lot of these different like domestic terrorism focuses, which are all framed at you now. Among other things, the Barr memo concluded that the president could, as a domestic law matter, order actions in contravention of the UN Charter's prohibition of the use of force, such as a forcible abduction of a foreign national in another country. You understand, just because the attorney general or any lawyer just writes a memo that claims that this makes sense does not mean that it does. But it says the memorandum ran 22 pages long, concerning most of which entailed a statutory interpretation of FBI authorities and the domestic status of customary international law. The explanation for its claim about the UN Charter and treaty law covered only 4 brief paragraphs. I'm not going to get too in-depth in this. You can read this for yourself, mostly for time, because this is a really nuanced and interesting conversation, but it gets into some pretty, you'll see. Now it says, the analysis boiled down to a flawed, in their mind, and I agree, assertion that Article 2, and it says 4 of the UN Charter, is non-self-executing for courts to enforce, and thus not domestic law binding on the executive. They just love to create these weird, broken, that it just somehow allows the executive branch to do whatever it wants, whenever. Why does that make sense to anybody? The entire premise of both the way the Constitution was put together and largely international law is to make sure that that's not the case, that you can't just do whatever you want, whenever you want, based on my justification. It says, as explained, it doesn't mean they don't all break it, by the way, but they're just making these things up in half the time. So you basically have Bill Barr write a memorandum and then use that later to justify why you could do what you want. It says, as explained at length below, the 4-paragraph analysis reached a radical conclusion that cannot withstand serious scrutiny. 2 notes before proceeding. It says, 1, a violation of the charter would still be unlawful as an international law matter. And no one contends otherwise, not even them. Meaning, arguably, you can have somebody from the international dynamic still go after Trump for breaking international law. They're just saying this doesn't violate from within the United States, that point. But it said, and I think that's how I'm reading that correctly. And it says, I am not aware of any instance in which the Barr memo has been implemented by an administration to excuse a violation of the UN Charter. Instead, the 4 paragraphs have remained around like a loaded gun and are now being used. Usually that's by design, in my opinion. But it goes on to make the point about the way they're talking about this charter point and the self-executing provisions, the treaty, and how they're misrepresenting those things to make this point. But read further if you understand. I think it's pretty clear, though, the general point about the UN dynamic and how they're applying their domestic view. I think this is weaponized government exactly like they claim they're going to stop. Now, remember, as Monda Weiss and plenty of others have highlighted, and you can look at the Israeli document itself right there, as always. This is and you can prove this yourself if you want to translate it. This is widely covered in People That Care to Look, that they argued very clearly back in 2018 and still to this day, and this was justifying annexing more of the West Bank, which now nobody seems to care about stopping. They say Israel says it's allowed to ignore international law anywhere it wants. It's kind of the same point, isn't it? And then you make sense why it's happening. But just to reiterate what it says right here, although the Knesset can legislate, so basically to make the point clear, they're discussing this within their government. And the point comes out, they're saying, well, you can't do that. It's against international law about taking places in the West Bank. And so many of them, this is one person's argument, but many of them argue, what are you talking about? If we can break the law anywhere else, why would we not be allowed to break it there? That's what they're actually arguing. Here's what it says. Although the Knesset can legislate any place in the world, that's how it starts, although it is entitled to violate the sovereignty of foreign countries through legislation that would be applied to events occurring in their territories, although it is within the authority of the government of Israel to annex any territory, although the Knesset may ignore directives of international law anywhere it pleases, despite all of these, the plaintiff seeks to define a rule by which precisely the West Bank and the Knesset is prohibited from legislating anything, and that precisely there in the West Bank and nowhere else in the world, it's subject to the directives of international law. I mean, can you imagine a world in which they can publicly make that argument and it can be publicly documented and we don't acknowledge that they're bragging that they can do whatever they want, anywhere they want, at any time? So why would the West Bank be different? These are Zionists we're talking about, guys. It's never been more clear than today. So on that note, let's talk about some of the more worthy of ridicule points. Here's Mike Lee, who starts off by saying, acting like he's all, I'm going to call this out. Of course, Nick Sorter and all the rest going, oh my God, everything's crazy. It's cool. All these terrible things they're doing is so cool and based. Here's Mike Lee saying, I look forward to learning what, if anything, might constitutionally justify this action in the absence of a declaration of war or authorization for the military force. And somebody down here goes, this guy is going to delete this and go and support them immediately, right? He didn't delete it, but he 1 hour later says, just got off the phone with Rubio, the guy who totally cares about international law. He informed me that Maduro has been arrested by U.S. personnel to stand trial on criminal charges in the United States, and that the kinetic actions we saw tonight was deployed to protect and defend those executing the warrants. That's just not true. You can very clearly look at the actual breadth of the campaign. It's just bombing. And in many cases, they bombed locations that had nothing to do with where they were. It looks like they even bombed the mausoleum of Chavez. Like, this is just deliberate, malicious, petty type attacks. The action likely falls within the president's inherent authority, he says, under Article 2. Guys, this is such a non-argument. There is no such authority. The president can just do what they want because Article 2. I don't know why anybody even engages with that. It says, to protect U.S. personnel from an actual imminent attack. You guys were the ones attacking. This is the Bethlehem Doctrine. This is preemptive self-defense. That's illogical. Only Israel, the United States, and the UK even adopt that mindset. But he goes, thank you, Rubio, for keeping me apprised. God, what a clown. Why even do this if you're going to embarrass yourself by just you go, what's the constitutional authority? And then you just go, he can do what he wants. That's the authority. And then he goes, he anticipates no further action in Venezuela now that Maduro's gone. And then literally after that comes out and goes, we may have to attack again. And then this guy doesn't even care. They're not real, guys. I mean, the sense of honest. These people are trying to feign what you think you want or what you want and don't really mean it, in my opinion. Dili Hussein says there is no international law. There is no rules-based order. The genocide in Gaza exposed that and shattered it. Trump has cemented that in Venezuela. Terrorists, Islamicists, anti-Semites, none of that has any leg to stand on. Now, here's the actual viewing of this. You tell me this looks like some kind of targeted laying the ground, to get Maduro and get out without really... I mean, look at this. And this is only one example, by the way. I mean, there's plenty of these you can find. I mean, and that's large, guys. It's obvious that this was causing damage, and most likely people were killed. This is shocking footage of massive U.S. attacks in Venezuela capitals hit the news. So DD Geopolitics points out some of the exact locations in all this and says, Venezuela recap. And that this was as of 6 a.m. this morning, which I think more has happened. Several hours after the start of the U.S. operation in Venezuela, the main targets and the current situation are becoming clearer. Most strikes hit military facilities. See, so they're just blatantly lying about this, and Mike Lee just parrots what they say, and people buy it without even looking. It says most military facilities, though some civilian sites were also attacked. So if the argument is you basically just laid cover to get Maduro and get out, then they wouldn't be bombing any facilities. They wouldn't be bombing civilian locations. And it says the targets hit. Caracas was the primary focus. U.S. aircraft struck targets in the La Fore and Lomos del Prado areas. These locations also produced the first visual confirmations of the U.S. landing force on Venezuelan territory. Civilian sites were hit as well. And this is not just because they say so. You can cross-reference these many different ways. Civilian sites were hit as well, as at least one explosion occurred at the Hugo Chavez Mausoleum, a site that has no military or administrative function, making the strike purely symbolic, or petty, rather. And on top of that, it's not close to what they're telling you they're doing. So how would that have anything to do with getting Maduro out of the way? LaGuardia Port also hit. Damage appears limited. Containers and part of perimeter fence was affected. Military site in a different area. Footage of secondary detonations. Reports of explosions during, basically multiple locations. The White House claimed the capture of Maduro and his wife. The reports of the death of the defense minister and interior minister turned out to be false. No strikes on oil productions or refining facilities had been recorded. They continue operating normally, which is obviously for a reason, because any other cases, they usually go after these kind of resources. Venezuelan armed forces offered no resistance and were effectively caught off guard. Or they were involved. We have to consider this right now. According to U.S. officials, no further military action in Venezuela is planned following the kidnapping. That said, if Washington's goal is the full removal of the country's leadership, it's unlikely to stop here because clearly they're not in control right now. On top of that, Trump's already come out and said they might have to bomb again. Mencho Sint says the U.S. has bombed the mausoleum, and here's just the video of it, of former Venezuelan leader Hugo Chavez. Think about that. This is, take something that means some kind of important Trump thing. Or like a former president you believe a lot in their grave and they just bomb it. Has nothing to do with the agenda. That's sending a message. It's also small. I mean in the sense of as a person, who you are. It's just these petty, vindictive kind of people. So Nick Sorter comes out and says, breaking, Trump just posted this photo of Nicolas Maduro aboard Iwo Jima. Dude's blindfolded and does not look comfortable. This is what FAFO looks like. Oh, God, just, it's not worth making the point every time. But, I mean, I often just wonder, this guy's just immature. He's childish and really doesn't report anything. He just blindly regurgitates what people tell him in the government, or rather just what the online conversation is of what Trump's doing, acting like that's journalism. It's just sad. And on top of what do you mean? Anyway, as I said, it's not worth getting into every time, but it's just so lazy what they're doing, and the laughy emojis and, oh my God, holy crap, look at what just happened. It's just sad, guys. And I'm of the mind that most, even people in the Republican conversation, they laugh at people like this. Benny Johnson. But nonetheless, they're brought up because it's what they use to control the conversation. Now, Cheryl Lynn points out, wait a minute, 4 photos of Maduro in custody. All 4 have different outfits. That's interesting. First one with the blood, I agree, is likely AI. That looks very much like AI to me, and the picture doesn't seem to connect back to anything else, but was posted and has millions of views, as usual. Second one, sitting on the plane with no jacket, shirt buttoned to the top, with a different shirt. Now, that one appears to be fake. I'll show you what Grok says, even though that's the most widely spread, it seems, and Grok could be wrong. And then it says 3, walking on the airport, black jacket, shirt unbuttoned at the top. So this could be the same overlap, but they'll get into what Grok says about the picture. On Iwo Jima in the sweatsuit, possibly gaming goggles. I mean, it's kind of weird, isn't it? So what made me start wondering is, maybe there's even more to this. Maybe there's something going on beyond what we think. And that there maybe all of it. But then why wouldn't it be discussed by people in Venezuela? I don't even know what that would mean. It's just when things like that happen, it makes you wonder whether there's a bigger story that we're all missing. Just worth pointing that out. But this is Annie Jacobson saying, unusual, it's surprise, kill, vanish. Surprise, capture, vanish is a rare feat. Imagine how Delta did this, and talking about all this stuff. And uniforms reveal, no insignia, CIA, SEALs, Bin Laden. Okay. And he goes, Grok, is this image from recently, or is it bad copy and pasta or paste? This person says the image is not recent. It's Grok. I don't know why I keep doing that. That's person. Grok said this. It's just my usual response. But it says it's from the 2003 capture of Saddam Hussein by U.S. forces. It appears to be used illustratively here for the ongoing Venezuelan operation, but it's unrelated, not copy pasta per se, just mismatched. But that's obviously not. So I don't know if they're insinuating that that's them who altered that of Saddam Hussein, or if that's just them misgauging that. I just find it interesting for whatever it is. Maybe Grok is just lying to you for some reason. Either way, the reality, as we're going to get into, is there is a ton of absolutely obvious AI, old imagery, and I think deliberately being done. So here's Musk, first of all, doing this kind of thing. Now, let's point out this could very well be real. Who's to say? Here's a guy making a video about how he's crying because Venezuela is now but again, like I've said in previous situations, it's actually not as hard as you may think to tap into the larger conversation or even point to the elections and the international observers, many of which were U.S. allies who very clearly told you that they were voted in and they lied about it. The point is most Venezuelans, just like most Iranians, do not want foreign powers to put Israel and U.S. interest in their country. They don't want that. And so when you have this kind of thing, maybe this guy wants the U.S. to do this. But the reality that this is tears of joy, because every Venezuelan now gets what they want, and that the Eric Dougherty, Nick Sorter, Benny Johnson conglomeration, whatever these people are, they just repeat and do the same exact things, the same red lights, the same breaking news, and they say Venezuelans are literally crying tears of joy all over because President captured Maduro. Okay, so one video comes out of one person saying something, and you turn that into literally everyone's doing this everywhere. This is bad journalism or just bad propaganda. And Elon Musk does his thing and says, long overdue. And he does this with all of them. He didn't just tap in and go share. He does this with anyone doing this in his circle. And he goes, yes, true, 100%. And usually in ways that are too fast to be him. We talked about this in the past. And this one goes, therefore I am. All these classic manipulators who are constantly getting caught lying. Says, here's another one. This is Uncle Donald Trump. Thank you. Uncle Donald Trump's Venezuelan influencer celebrating. Okay. Because clearly that proves everything, doesn't it? It's just so lazy. But this could be somebody, right? But are you not going to point out? Right now you could do the worst thing in this country and there'd be some American to be like, yay. Does that mean everyone agrees with it? No, it doesn't. They know that. They're just lazy. Okay. On top of that, there's tons of lies going around. Here's Clown World. What is it? 3 million followers. This has gotten 26,000 views, which is funny to me. And on top of that, this video. And here, so in the past, you could argue, like I've talked about before, engagement kind of dynamic with this. Even this, though, I get the personal feeling that, first of all, that doesn't add up. Like I keep saying, that should be 1 million. And then the engagement would be low if they didn't like it. Here's what I think. I think that these things are being caught because they are. Oh, you know what? I knew that was going to happen. Oh my God. I'm glad I took a picture of this. Hold on. I'm telling you, this is exactly the point. I think this is why it got suppressed. Wow. Check this out. Tell me I saved it. I have Grok pointing it out anyway. Hold on. There was a thing beneath it. My God, this is so crazy how often this happens. Okay, this is an old video. Grok will tell you this video is a Twitter post showing a banner of Nicolas Maduro being torn down. is not recent, and it dates back to 2024. So the point here is that they tried to lie about this back then. Now, this is a Maduro poster coming down, and all you can really see is a couple people clapping in the background. That doesn't mean maybe they were happy about it. Maybe they were wanting him removed, which that happens in every country. Look in this country. Half this country wants Trump out of the way. Like they wanted Biden at the same point. Does that mean that we should want Iran coming in to overthrow our government? No. The point, though, is that they're lying about this. So symbolic. No, it's not about what's going on right now. These people are all out there trying to grift for you. There was a post on that. But this is my point was, I think that these people are doing things that actually hurt the agenda because they're so lazy with their fact checking that it actually gets suppressed by the platform that supports them. I actually believe that, but it's completely my opinion. And then, of course, removes what says it's wrong. So here is another example. And this guy's been calling a lot of people out. Of course, Cat Turd, back whenever this was, before this, says, name one U.S.-inspired regime change that hasn't ended an absolute disaster. Of course, when you're calling out Republican or Democrats, here he is today going, Venezuela is now more free than New York City. Just being hypocritical, right? So now it's okay to do them, even though we criticized them before. Or Paul A. says, Pula says, vote Trump if you want, and this is 2024, vote Trump if you want peace and your children to stay at home. Vote Kamala if you want your children drafted and sent off to war. The choice is clear. Okay, here he is now going, getting back to oil rights will make gasoline in the U.S. even cheaper. Woohoo! Oh, so I guess the other part doesn't matter now, right? Here, this is you calling out. This is perfect. Terrence K. Williams, you know, one of these bombastically large influencers. 2023. And they said Trump would start wars. They laugh about it, right? Here he is today. I stand with Trump. I voted for him because I trust his judgment. See how quickly that shifts? Well, wait a minute, but you just said that they wouldn't do that. Now he does, but it's okay because you trust him? Yeah, that's blind following, guys. That's embarrassing. That's called loyalty, not facts, not criticism. Like the whole point about politics is these people are supposed to be critical towards people, especially if they're in your side, because you want them to succeed, don't you? That's not succeeding. That's you hiding from the reality because you blindly want to support your team. You don't have any morals or rather any principles if you just pull away because Trump did it. Same thing with the left. Here is Joey Mania. It's all these big guys all doing the same thing. Here he is in 2025, June. There will not be a regime change war. Mark that down. There will not be boots on the ground. Remember, Trump just said that there will be boots on the ground. Here he is saying they need to take Maduro out and his cabinet out today and will not make this last long. Take them all out at once and move on. What a hypocrite. Even Twitter calls him out and says in June, this author said there will not be boots on the ground. Here he is calling for boots on the ground. This guy's huge, by the way. 700,000 followers, or 6.5. Here, Nick Shirley. Hey, look at Nick Shirley coming back in with more propaganda. And he says, wait a minute. And this is a video of people with Venezuelan flags. And it says, wait a minute. The mainstream media lied to us again. The people of Venezuela didn't actually like being ruled by a narco-terrorist. World Cup style celebrations erupting all across Venezuela. Here's one look. Except that's Miami, bud. It says, but who cares? Just keep retweeting it. It feels good. And that's what matters most. And Glenn calling him out. This is all over, guys. I could have made an entire show about this. And I make this point every time. It happened to their drones and fog and everything else. And you get this just overwhelming stories of old videos, of altered AI stuff, of just blind repetition of things that aren't true. And that's not to say that there's not some level in there that should be talked about, but they're always doing this. It's incessant. And again, here's Alex Jones. Millions of Venezuelans flooded the streets of Caracas and major cities. And here it is, they're fighting communists. And oops, actually, that's old. And realistically, if you look into it, I don't even believe that's about people resisting Maduro. If I remember correctly, I believe that's about, what was that again? And the reality is an old video. Here, let's go back to this. I was trying to find, this is just here we go. It doesn't say on there. What was that? Do you remember what it was, the time frame? If this was 18 months ago. Because I remember these massive protests. I mean, the idea that this was without them, the reality on the ground, regardless of this video, again, I challenge you all to do your due diligence and look into what you can verify. I mean, it's like with Iran. They're openly saying, we don't want outside interference. And you know who's saying they do? The leaders that are bought off and supported by the U.S. and Israel. But I just think it's embarrassing that these people continue to act like they're just grifting, guys. They're absolutely, or at the very least, are this bad at their job. They don't check anything. And as I've told you before, as many people have, as Richard Grove said after he went over, they don't check their sources. Here, oh, this is the same one. Chris Menahan says, and this is Fox News guest, I guess his name is Julian Epstein, funny timing, says Venezuelans yearn to be free from Maduro. And as a result of Trump's war, quote, could be very, very welcome liberation, and the Venezuelan people will be dancing in the streets. And of course, the anchor on Fox just runs with it. That's never happened, in fact. And on top of the fact that that's what they said about Iraq. Welcomed as liberating heroes. And they knew that wasn't true at the time. They know that's not true now. Now, here are a couple of examples, but I don't want you just to take my impression, like I was just saying. Do your due diligence and go out and find out. Talk to people on the ground. There are plenty of reporters that will tell you, like Camilla, who are very much involved with the ground conversation. Hold on, Maduro. The people are rising up. This is what these people are screaming about. Venezuelans in Caracas are pouring into the streets in support of their president, like they told you was the plan. Take a look, guys. I don't need to give you 17 videos because most people will go, rightly so, that we don't know. These videos could be selectively taken. Take the time to look into this conversation. Here's an example. Here she is saying, this is one example of a woman speaking to people who will listen, saying, we want to live in our homeland with our president, with the men and women who love this country. Leave us in peace. We want peace. We want you to lead. You want to lead us to war. We want peace, but we're already in the streets, ready to give our lives if necessary to defend our homeland to the President Maduro. You know, sort of like the Palestinians were willing to stand in line or in the way of what was happening and willing to risk their lives, which they then use to call them terrorists. It's the same way they're going to do this. Now, here is, I think just in the interest of time, not that I necessarily have to rush, but I wanted this to be shorter for retention. But this is a good article from an independent platform called Venezuela Analysis. Now, very much so in support of I think, the stance that I'm taking, or just that Venezuela pushing back against U.S. imperialism. But nonetheless, and I believe they do good work. Consider their perspective. Venezuelan international popular movements condemn U.S. bombings, Maduro kidnapping. Now, the real point here is the popular movements and international solidarity organizations, a lot have been standing up, like I was just showing you earlier, and condemning what's happening, calling it a crime. And it's just following the bombings and special operations raid. What was it? The government collectives began to concentrate near the President Palace. Demonstrations were likewise registered in many other Venezuelan cities. It says, long live a free and revolutionary Venezuela. Grassroots leader Machado told press, this is the one on the other side, international institutions must stop being accomplices to take a stance because our people are being massacred. Oh, no, excuse me, that's a different one. But it says, she went on to state that the U.S. government is not the world's police. Okay, so it's interesting. Different first name. I just missed that. I thought it was Machado. Different person in this is simply saying that they're not the world's police, demanding that they, which is the reality. It's what Trump pretended he cared about, urging the international community to take stance against U.S. actions. The point is that they're coming out against this from an international perspective, dealing with international groups. And there's a lot of support for that. Now, like I said before, here's Musk doing his usual algorithm thing. Marco Rubio, I guess, just post a screenshot of Marco Rubio's tweet. Why does that even make sense? I guess you can call it a boomer. I don't even know. It's just funny. But he says, true to what? Rubio saying Maduro is not the president. Why do you, the only reason you even do that is to amplify this, which based on what the reality of how this all works is very dishonest with knowing that that's going to give it 20 million views when it's not even true. But people could do what they want, but reality is the way that they're background manipulating the platform. He is not just an independent involved, like Trump pretends he's some kind of third party involved. This is a controlling part of what we're talking about. Now, Tim Anderson says how to qualify for Team America, the puppet show. Well, you can look at Machado, you can look at Giuliani, you can look at Reza Pahlavi, and what you'll find is none of them are elected by popular support or have popular revolutions. No, but guess what? They all ready to privatize national assets to the United States. They're all ready to carry out terrorism against citizens of their own country. They're all facilitating invasions of their own country, and they're all ready to recognize Israel to a T. What a coincidence. Now, here she is, Machado, the Maria Corina Machado, the one that's ready to sell out her country to Israel and the United States, says, Venezuelans, the hour of freedom has arrived. But no one's listening to her. That's not what's happening in the country right now on the ground, as with my research yesterday into today. And well before that, for all the time we've been covering Venezuela. That's her, just like Guaido, doing the exact same thing. Do we forget how that went? And here's you know what? I think I forgot to grab this. I'm going to skip. Basically, the point is
Saudi Arabia.
We have oil. That's what she's saying. Forget about Saudi Arabia. We have more oil. And they're willing to allow the U.S. government to take advantage of that. How does that support Venezuelan interests, guys? And this is speaking with Trump Jr. Or is that the Trump? I don't know. One of Trump's sons. Same point here. Saying Venezuela's Nobel Prize winner, saying, as soon as we conquer freedom, it's a weird way to frame that, I will move our Israeli embassy to Jerusalem. It's difficult to find a U.S. war that doesn't in some way benefit Israel. It's exactly what Tim was just saying. Here she is. Machado, the far-right U.S.-backed Venezuelan coup leader who won the Nobel Peace Prize, promised a massive privatization if Trump can put her in power. I mean, literally promising all the things Tim just outlined that are not in the interest of Venezuelans if they gain power. She says she vowed to sell $1.7 trillion of Venezuelan oil, gas, and gold infrastructure to U.S. corporations. Because Venezuelans, right? It couldn't be more transparent. Here is Shadow of Ezra, this funny picture of that image, saying, Trump confirms that pro-Israel Machado is not being considered to run Venezuela, as we heard earlier. He says she has no respect inside the country and the administration has no contact with her. She has no respect. It's funny. Clearly, that's what I think Israel's invested in some ways, but we'll see what happens. I kind of don't feel like that's an honest statement. I feel like it might end up being her anyway, probably because other countries want that, as in Israel. But Susan points out an interesting overlap to this. You might not have known that while this took place, a Chinese delegation was in Venezuela. And interestingly, were there remaining after he left, which kind of seems like that would be this case regardless. If they kind of bull rush in, grab him and leave, they'd still be there. But the implication continues to be that maybe there was something going on. Maybe they were involved. That's worth asking. I've yet to see any provable evidence there, or just any evidence, let alone proof. But that had happened with that timing, I find interesting. And people the weird way that China fits into a lot of this stuff in the world that is connected to Israel and back channels and plenty of things, it tends to be different than people who want to see that like them as the counterbalance to the Western dynamic. I see a lot of the same things for all of them. But she says it seems the U.S. war machine was deployed against Venezuela while a Chinese delegation was visiting to negotiate bilateral trade deals. This rogue attack is meant to send a signal to China. You could read it that way. That's a good point. Or a signal to China, Russia, Iran, all the BRICS, and the rest of the world, that they will do whatever they want without restraint. They're sure as hell sending that message. We will bypass Congress, international partners, all institutions. International law is a tool we use to assert our dominance, but it does not apply to us. She says we and us does not mean the U.S. because America is not a democracy and the majority of Americans don't benefit. This is my point, guys. The world sees this. When Iran, the rest, when they're talking about America, they're talking about the government that we're criticizing too. We and us signifies Israel and the capitalist American elite, who are mostly one and the same. Now, interestingly, I guess not interestingly, but just embarrassingly, people like this. Look at this. Follow me for breaking news. Mia Joy, who basically just like all the rest of them, just goes, yay, what they did. Okay, here's an interesting point. You have a Chinese delegation. You'd carry out an illegal operation. And she goes, China went to meet Maduro today to discuss joining forces, or rather just deals. But see, that's how they see this, is we can't allow them to work together because they're mean and they're going to fight us. Then Trump captures Maduro on the same day. And she goes, savage. Savage or illegal, illegitimate, corrupt. And she goes, in fact, the Chinese delegation is still in Venezuela. Trump captures Maduro and sends a powerful message and to Xi and China at the same time. Right. We'll do whatever we want, China. We'll attack you and murder you. We'll send you off to prison. Savage. I mean, okay, if Biden had done this, what would you say, Mia Joy? Criminal, terrorist. Yes, because you guys are all ridiculous. I mean, not regardless of whether that's even true, what he's doing is wrong. If you guys are the ones talking about fighting the evil deep state global dynamic, this is not that. This is the opposite. This is leaning in to the very same things are you forgetting that Biden's administration was trying to overthrow Venezuela? And Obama's administration was trying. So if it's a deep state Democrat, well, then you're helping them, aren't you? It's just so lazy, guys. Okay. On the same point, Reuters, floating oil facility arrives in Venezuela for China Concord project. So I get more of the sense that this was about them, as usual, trying to stop some kind of an agreed collaborative deal. Instead of just the U.S. stealing the oil like they always do, and like they're doing right now, China goes, hey, we'll make a deal with you. And like I always point out, probably using their power to gain influence or whatever else. Sure. But it's an agreement. And so they're now going to make an agreement that will benefit Venezuela and China, and the children that are the U.S. government go, we can't have that. We'll just take it for ourselves and scare China. Like, at some point, this has to blow up in their face if there's any legitimacy in the world left. And I believe that there is to some degree, because this is just crazy and wrong. On top of that, Fox and Friends goes, what do you see as the future for Venezuela's oil industry? Trump says, well, I see that we're going to be very strongly involved. That's all. What can I say? We have the greatest oil companies in the world. I mean, so again, the point before, I know it's more than oil, but the people who are making it the claim, they've been pretty clearly shown to be right, that oil seems to be at least what they're telling you, which kind of suggests to me that it's obviously about more than oil, and that's what they are saying because it's easy to accept, even though that's a crime. Okay, but what's new, right? So here, I think this one, yeah, I think that's this one here.
Countries that negotiate with Venezuela for those that illegal oil are already starting to suffer. What do you see as the future of Venezuela's oil industry?
Well, I see that we're going to be very strongly involved in it. That's all. I mean, what can I say? We have the greatest oil companies in the world, the biggest, the greatest, and we're going to be very much involved in it. We can't do something like this, and we're prepared. You know, we were prepared to do a second wave. We were all set, and this was so lethal, this was so powerful that we didn't have.
Oh, it's lethal now. Didn't you literally just say that nobody was killed? Do you not know what lethal means? On top of the fact that why would there be a second wave? It was only about Maduro. You know, he does this to himself every time.
But we're prepared. We're out there with an armada like nobody's ever seen before, and we're prepared.
And I've never seen it before, except that's not true. Doesn't matter though. Everything he does is never before seen, bigger than anybody ever before. No one says they say that we did this and nobody else in the world can. He actually said that. They tell me that nobody else could have conducted this the way we did. That's just obviously not true, but you know, whatever makes you feel like you're powerful, Trump.
And we're prepared. And frankly, probably thought we were going to have to do it, but we were prepared for a second wave going in.
Yeah. So his point is we're going to steal what we want because, you know, we're prepared to take. So they prepared to take what they want. So they're probably going to take what they want. So here are some other overlapping points. This is back in, when was this? 2018? I forget now, but this was before when Trump, this is after, no, excuse me. It would have been after that because it's after his last administration. He says that, as you saw before, when we left, Venezuela was ready to collapse. We would have taken it over, gotten the oil. And damn those Biden administration for letting them not collapse. I mean, that's not what he's saying, because clearly all of them have done that. But it's funny, the implication that they were ready to collapse, but then they didn't. And then we come back in and now they're collapsing again. I mean, how do you not understand how clear that is? You guys are coerced, manipulatively making this country collapse or suffering, or with Iran, it's the same point. And Trump simply saying that we were doing that. And then it kind of stopped because we weren't in power. And so it's owning the criminal, owning the illegitimate, because he thinks that's somehow like he can like he's been praising himself, that his audience can be like, you're so great, Trump. Look, Biden couldn't even do the illegal thing as good as you, pretty much. But it's about the oil, as he made repeatedly clear, and everything else, resources.
We're buying oil from Venezuela. When I left, Venezuela was ready to collapse. We would have taken it over. We would have gotten all that oil. It would have been right next door. But now we're buying oil from Venezuela, so we're making a dictator very rich. Can you believe this? Nobody can believe it. You know where the oil, their oil is garbage. It's horrible. The worst you can get, tar. It's like tar. And to refine it, you need special plants. And these people.
And here is a recent one. This one is from December 18th. They took our oil rights, which is the most insane thing to say. I think Glenn made some points about this. The U.S. government has been robbing this country for as long as I've been alive. And how in the world they took your oil rights in their part of the, it's just because they see themselves, guess what, as a global idea. That's globalism for you. And he's telling you, we want it back.
What was that?
Getting land, oil rights, whatever we had, they took it away because we had a president.
Land? Okay, so explain for me how in what way you possibly own Venezuelan land in South America. He's just showing himself to be what he is.
That maybe wasn't watching, but they're not going to do that. We want it back. They took our oil rights. We had a lot of oil there. As you know, they threw our companies out, and we want it back.
Ah, well, that's certainly more clear, isn't it? Right? Okay, so you manipulated the country into letting your companies profit at their expense, and they don't want that. Sort of like when Iran and Mossadegh nationalized the oil and they overthrew and put their people in place. Do you not see a common thread here? They wanted to use the oil to benefit their country. And before this, remember, before you start screaming about Maduro was going to only do it to enrich himself, probably to some degree, but you can prove before this what they did was use at least part of those the oil revenue to give basically interest-free loans to other countries who were suffering from any number of things, but largely U.S. imperialism. And they didn't want that. So they stopped that and stole the money, stole the gold. The truth is that this was absolutely being done for the benefit of these other places at their expense to some degree. And you want your rights back, the rights that you stole from them that are their resources? How would you even own the rights over their resources? The only reason you were there is because you either bullied your way in or because they allowed that. You see how crazy this is? This is globalism. This is imperialism. It's very transparent. Here, next one, same conversation. He's saying this is him asking about what other countries might want. You'll never believe his answer, or maybe you will. Guess what? They're oil salesmen.
China, Russia, and Iran have interests in Venezuela. How does this operation affect your relationships with them when it comes to the oil and the drugs?
And Russia, Russia when we get things straightened out. But in terms of other countries that want oil, we're in the oil business. We're going to sell it to them. We're not going to say we're not going to go to it.
Oh, so apparently the government's in the oil business. You see, he lets these things slip because he's clumsy. That's not supposed to be how that works, guys. Wouldn't that also be sort of a socialist dynamic? That the government's in control of resources and industry? But not when Trump does it. I mean, how clear is that, guys? You're not in the oil business, or maybe yes, you are. But the point is the government's not supposed to be. That's supposed to be companies that are doing their own capitalist drive. It's just everything is coming apart. Everything is coming out. And I don't even know if he realizes what he's doing, but I kind of get the sense that at some level they do. I think this is about more than it seems.
In other words, we'll be selling oil, probably in much larger doses. The oil business, we're going to sell it to them. We're not going to say we're not going to go to it. In other words, we'll be selling oil, probably in much larger doses because they couldn't produce very much because their infrastructure was so bad.
See, that's such a blatant lie. It's ridiculous. Because, again, you could prove that that was what was going on before they manipulated this. But, again, that you're going to take their oil and sell that like that's not criminal? But at the very least, wouldn't that go to benefit in any way Venezuelans? No. They're going to steal it, sell it for their benefit, and then claim that's going to be writing off their financial efforts to invade the country illegally in the first place. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
So we'll be selling large amounts of oil to other countries, many of whom are using it now. But I would say many more will come.
Are you saying, Mr. President?
I'm genuinely kind of blown away by how this is going. And so let's not forget this overlap as well. We played this before. This is the Southern Command Chief General Laura Richardson talking about the rare earth mineral overlap. This has been there the entire time. I still continually find it interesting that that's getting so little conversation, which makes me think that's really what it's about.
Of course, the countries, Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua with Russia relationships. Why this region matters with all of its rich resources and rare earth elements. You've got the lithium triangle, which is needed for technology today. 60% of the world's lithium is in the lithium triangle, Argentina, Bolivia, Chile. You just have the largest oil reserves, light sweet crude, discovered off of Guyana over a year ago.
And just to be clear, there is a massive unrealized lithium deposit in Venezuela, and gold and oil and a lot of other things.
You have Venezuela's resources as well with oil, copper, gold, We have the Amazon, lungs of the world. We have the 31% of the world's fresh water in this region too. I mean, it's just off the charts. We have a lot to do. This region matters. It has a lot to do with national security, and we need to step up our game.
How much more clear can that even get? Right. National security, because we need to steal what we need to survive. I've said it for so long, this government runs off the blood of other nations, runs off the exploitation of other countries. It doesn't have to be the way it is. It is the way it is currently. So here is our motto, just simply breaking down an interesting map. The black sands of southern Venezuela, rich in coltan. We've talked about coltan I think it's the Congo overlap and a couple of the places that are rich in that. That's an important one for electronics and different weaponry. Coltan, rare earth minerals are plundered by state actors, guerrillas, and mafias organizing between Bolivar, Amazones, and Colombia. That's what they're after, guys. Now, Tulsi Gabbard had this to say recently. The United States needs to stay out of Venezuela. Let the Venezuelan people determine their future. We don't want other countries to choose our leaders. So we have to stop trying to choose theirs. Oh, wait a minute. I'm sorry. I'm confused. I thought that looks like it was from 2019. So I guess she's a hypocrite. Yeah, exactly. That's because this is not some unique moment-to-moment dynamic. That's a general point about everything they're doing right now. And everyone at the time said, thank you, they're great. Real politician. You're really fighting for freedom. Not today. How crazy. And I simply said, hey, Tulsi Gabbard, you should listen to this person below. They seem to have the right idea. Oh, wait. Today, she's supporting this. And I could show you, it's very obvious. She's spoken in support of pretty much everything. This one as well. Tulsi Gabbard says, 2019, it's about the oil. Again, Bolton, and this was Donald Trump's administration, again, just exposed real motive for intervention in Venezuela. Think of how crazy this is. We're in conversation with major American companies now. It would make a difference if we could have American companies produce the oil in Venezuela. We both have a lot of stake here. And then Trump acts like Bolton's the bad guy and we're against him. They're the same person. He's got a mustache. It's just crazy. And she's going bad. Now she supports it. Yeah, you're a hypocrite. And as Patrick Henderson rightly points out, Gabbard needs to resign now or be unmasked as one of the biggest political frauds of our era. Today, we see the bombs raining down on Venezuela, U.S. troops deployed in another regime change war based on 100% fake intelligence and fabricated evidence. Here's the supposed director of national intelligence on October 31st, 2025, months ago, claiming Trump was putting an end to Washington's endless regime change nation-building wars. Not mentioning Donald Trump's nation-building Holocaust in Gaza, which Tulsi Gabbard supported from day one of the genocide. It's more than likely Tulsi has been promised funding for a presidential run in 2028. And maybe she somehow rationalizes that as worth being a liar right now, or allowing people to be murdered in every way you argued was wrong to maybe stop it in the future. Even if that's what she agrees in, I 100% disagree with that. You're a hypocrite if that's the case. And it's like Trump allowing the shot to be given to kill children today for COVID shot, but then acting like it's only a means to end to stop them in the future. How you can ever rationalize something like that? And it's also just not true, by the way, at least in his sense. Who knows with her? And he says, basically, it's more than likely it's been promised funding run. That's how they buy ambitious careerists like her. It's beyond a joke.
The old Washington way of thinking is something we hope is in the rearview mirror and something that has held us back for too long. For decades, our foreign policy has been trapped in a counterproductive and endless cycle of regime change or nation building. It was a one-size-fits-all approach of toppling regimes, trying to impose our system of governance on others, intervene in conflicts that were barely understood, and walk away with more enemies than allies. The results: trillions spent, countless lives lost, and in many cases, a creation of greater security threats. The rise of Islamist terrorist groups like ISIS.
Yeah, literally pointing out that what they're doing is causing this, on top of the fact that, as even she has insinuated before and basically stated, that the U.S. government was involved with these groups.
President Trump was elected by the American people to put an end to this. And from day one, he has showed a very different way to conduct foreign policy.
Yeah, quite different. I mean, I almost kind of sense that she's like, tap twice if you're in distress, like that she's not in good. I even the way that she's even presenting this. But yeah, it sure as hell has been different. It's just sad, guys. Now, just like with RFK, you could certainly go, hey, maybe she's been blackmailed. Doesn't change for me, and especially since you can't prove that. We need to call these people out. That's disgusting. You can't make those statements and then act like everything's good now and claim Trump's fighting regime change wars. That's just pathetic. And I get the sense that that's kind of always been her game. Maybe I'm just a pessimist when it comes to government. That's the case. So Thomas Massey says 25-page indictment, but no mention of fentanyl or stolen oil. Search it for yourself. Take a look. So you're going to make this entire case about stolen oil and fentanyl and then not even include that in the legal dynamic for why you're doing this when you stated that's why you're doing this? When you couldn't you even have accidentally done it better than that? This is why I keep going, this feels deliberate to some degree, to some element, because that's just lazy. But maybe that's Bondi being her, what they've been doing. I'll include that. You can check it out for yourself. Greg Stoker says, according to U.S. officials, Maduro was captured by Delta Force, the prominent U.S. Special Forces Operations Unit. That's what they're claiming anyway. He says, but we're only seeing DEA patches for the photo ops. He says, so we can all collectively pretend this was a law enforcement operation and that it was about drugs and not oil or Sino-Russian influence in the region, meaning that they're carefully cultivating the imagery that you're seeing so you can subliminally be like, oh, it's about drugs. That's what they do. I guess that's one part that's not that clumsy. This is J.D. Vance going, it wasn't illegal, right? As he writes, Murray, J.D. Vance must have forgotten that 30 days ago, Trump pardoned the former leader of Honduras and drug kingpin, Juan Orlando Hernandez, who was in prison for drug trafficking. This isn't about narco-terrorism. You're full of it like the rest of them. Remember, and this is very clear, I think. So on that note, again, with drugs, Tom Cotton says, Nicolas Maduro wasn't just an illegitimate leader. He also ran a vast drug traffic operation. That's just simply, the evidence is not there for that. They can say it all day long. No one's proven that claim. This is funny. Oh, here's just Grok saying, or them asking, which Latin countries produce the most narcotics? As it says, Colombia, Mexico, Peru, and Bolivia. Venezuela is more of a transit hub. See, even Grok will call out their BS, and it doesn't change anything. So he's simply going, that's why he was indicted on U.S. courts nearly 6 years ago for drug trafficking. Oh, because you guys are criminals? Yes, I understand that. So Raddick simply goes, the Sackler family is directly responsible for the opioid crisis, by the way, which was proven. If you followed my work in the past, you already know this. There's not just the fact that they were pushing this, but they had meetings on the record, weirdly enough, behind the scenes, about the crisis and about how they could exploit the crisis, and then even further about how they could exploit it and then drive people to use Narcan after they have overdoses. And they got fines, lots of money, but they're insanely wealthy. And that's the cost of doing business, like Wells Fargo. They go, here's $1 billion fine. Guess what? They made $40 billion that year, or whatever it is, every time. So they're directly responsible, and you could prove that in court. And it claimed many lives of many people. They were engaged in a vast criminal conspiracy, and not a one of them has faced jail or even charges. So let's not pretend, Tom, like you guys care about any of this. And again, like I showed you, it's kind of crazy that you can have this article from August of 2025 talking about how the DEA was laundering $19 million of cartel money, the same cartel they claim they're trying to stop, into cash and crypto for their benefit within the drug trafficking trade. I mean, you have to realize how consistent this is with the reality. Look back in history right to this very day. Look up James, why did I forget his first name? Webb. That's crazy. The one who broke the story about basically the U.S. government flooding the streets with crack and the illegal trade through the intelligence. Gary Webb. There it is. It's an important story. And remember, the story about him, not a joke, by the way, is that he shot himself in the head twice. I don't even understand why that wasn't like, that's crazy. Don't say that. You can't possibly, anyway, it's It's crazy. It's like the Clinton body count and talking about how these doctors stabbed themselves in the chest, or these completely illogical things that happened. But that's how this works. We're dealing with a criminal organization, as Whitney's outlined very well. Niall Strange says, to believe this is about drug smuggling, you have to ignore Trump's pardon of the former Honduras president. To believe it's about Maduro democratic legitimacy, you have to believe that Trump cares even slightly about democratic legitimacy. See, this is people who have a brain or who are honest with themselves. Because how can you support Saudi Arabia and then act like you care about democratic legitimacy or Israel or any number of places that are like objectively not what they're claiming? But he says, alternatively, the oil, which is one of the points. Morgan points out, and this is from December 9th, and it's backed up in the same day by somebody who makes good points, but he says, people aren't that stupid. Oh, first of all, it's this post. This guy's going, look, the fisherman. And it's one of these MAGA, whatever. And it's a guy dumping things off a boat, which I think is pretty obviously a fake video, like an AI. It's just, this is not coming from the government. This is just some random video they shared of a guy dumping things off a boat, which doesn't even look real to me, but that's not the point. She says, people aren't that stupid. And I hadn't even fleshed this point out about the actual logistics of it. Venezuela isn't a threat, she writes. It's a prize. Your government needs to paint it as some looming danger so it can justify rolling in and taking control now that China has just built an oil project in that Teardrop Lake. That's what I was just talking about. So she points this out in regard to the U.S. dynamic. Look at that, by the way. All those U.S. It's just, like the old joke, why are you building your country so close to our U.S. bases? It's just so funny. And then the real point, though, this is what I was just showing you, is what he says down here. He goes, precisely. Think about the logistics here. He goes, before anyone talks about bombing fishing boats or stopping fentanyl from Venezuela, here are the actual facts. Distance. The closest point between Venezuela and the United States is 1,073 miles. That's over 1,000 miles of open ocean. Fishing boats. A typical fishing boat would need 6 to 12 full tanks of fuel to even attempt that trip. It's not realistic trafficking route. It's not even physically practical. How much fentanyl comes from Venezuela? Virtually none. Venezuela is not a source country for fentanyl in the United States. It's just not. Whereas where U.S. fentanyl actually comes from, as we talked about, China supplies most of the precursor chemicals. Mexico manufactures it. In many cases, by the way, you can prove, in fact, with that DEA article too, the overlap of how the working with the U.S. government to make that in Venezuela, or in Mexico, excuse me. Max Blumenthal was just covering the story of a U.S. entity, I forget his name now, somebody in the U.S. government, who was being investigated, and this is recently, for actually helping set these things up in Mexico for fentanyl. And did you hear about that? I mean, it's just wild. And he goes on to say here, the idea that Venezuelan fishing boats are flooding the U.S. with fentanyl is just wrong. It's not just wrong. It's physically impossible. If we want to solve a fentanyl crisis, we have to start with the facts. But see, they don't want to solve any of these crises. This is about control. Here is the point back to the Honduras network state agenda overlap. For just a quick point, here's what Trump just said.
Yeah. You said that Maduro is responsible for drug trafficking. You recently pardoned the former president of Honduras, who was convicted on many drug trafficking. Can you explain how these two situations are different? And would you ever pardon Maduro?
So think about what he said. Explain why those are different. It's the question we're all asking. That seems hypocritical. And then he adds, will you pardon him? He doesn't address any of it. Listen to his answer.
Endorsed, as you know, the winning president, the man who won in Honduras. I endorsed the man who won in Chile. I endorsed the man who won in Argentina.
Okay. First of all, in most of these places, you guys are 100% manipulating things. But what does that have to do with the question?
And we are doing very well with that whole group. What the man that I pardoned was, if you could equate it to us, he was treated like the Biden administration treated a man named Trump.
Easy. Listen, Republicans, it was a Democrat thing, like Biden. Just remember, Democrats bad. Is that enough for you? Like, how insane is that? No, realize that he's lying about every part of this. In fact, the reality was that this overlapped with his last administration. And this guy was a criminal. He went to prison. He pardoned him for many agendas, I think, Israel, Venezuela, and very clearly, and I mean, without question, because of the agenda going on with Prospera and the larger network state discussion. I'll show you my article or my show. I covered this extensively. But he's literally just acting like this was, what did he last say right there?
Like the Biden administration.
Basically just political manipulation. That he didn't break any laws. You can prove he did, right? Very clearly. And it was just them manipulating him because he's in power. It's also used to set up the argument that they shouldn't be held accountable for their crimes.
Treated a man named Trump. That didn't work out too well. Yeah. Like the Biden administration treated a man named Trump. That didn't work out too well for them. This was a man who was persecuted very unfairly. He was the head of the country.
Nope. Well, yes, he was, but no, he wasn't. It wasn't persecuted. Nobody thinks that, guys. That's insane. This is just like them making up the narrative to everything else they do, and they know their million-follower lackeys will make this force this into the main conversation and then overtake everybody else's conversation.
He was persecuted very unfairly, and there are a number of them, and we felt that it was a very unfair situation that happened to him.
Okay, what about the facts, though? Like, are you going to engage with the facts ever, or is it just that we decided and we felt, so feelings and ideas, like this is obvious?
He's also a party member of the man who won.
Yep.
So obviously the people liked what I did.
Oh, or aside from the fact that you absolutely provably manipulated the election, and that's not just publicly on Twitter and threatening if they don't do it that we're going to hurt the country, which he did. No. On the ground. See how they do that? Sort of like when they indict Maduro and then point to that indictment as the justification for why everything adds up. That's just broken logic. That's circular logic.
And one of the reasons that was done is because of the fact that the party in power felt very strongly that that man was treated very badly.
Yeah, you mean his party? Of course they did. On top of the fact that his party is the reason Prospero was put in place. That is the whole idea around this, and that's not debatable. And they very clearly wanted to support the larger agenda. He was involved, whether it's about drug trafficking or the government itself or the large agenda. These people are all on the same side. And even if you disagree with any of it, the point is he broke the law. That's been proven. They're just trying to hide from that. And of course, the embarrassment of the fact that Trump or that claiming Biden did this. No, it's actually Trump's guy. We'll show you that next.
I studied it very quickly, and then I studied it in great detail. I went to a lot of the people standing behind me, and they felt that that man was persecuted and treated very badly.
Oh,
that's why I gave him a pardon.
Okay, so Maduro Marco Rubio told me that this guy shouldn't be in jail. So, I'm the smart one and made the smart decision. I wonder if he got misled. It said MS-13. Pathetic. I mean, I genuinely think to some degree that this guy gets played often and just doesn't admit it even to himself. But okay, let's talk about this point. As Bread and Circus points out, no. He was prosecuted by, the argument being that this guy was prosecuted by Biden and illegitimately. No, he was prosecuted by Emil Bove, who acted as Trump's personal defense lawyer in the hush money case. Trump just appointed the guy to federal judiciary. That's the clip he just shared. And here, this is the same point made by Max Blumenthal. Trump defends convicted narco trafficker and right-wing Honduran politician, ally Juan Orlando Hernandez, claiming he was prosecuted very unfairly. Hernandez was prosecuted by Emil Bove, a Trump loyalist appointed by the president to the federal bench. I mean, on top of the fact that it's overlapped with his administration, this is embarrassing. They keep just lying. Nothing new, really. But what's new is that maybe they're just so vulnerable and so desperate, so insecure in their position that what else are they going to do? It's like Israel just going, we're not committing genocide. What else are they going to say? That's what it seems like they're doing lately. There's no real thought. There's no backup. You're lying. We can prove it, but just, no, I'm not. Okay. I'll include this show where we made this exact point on December 2nd, 2025. Honduras regime change for Prospera. Now, I've been talking about this long before we got here. I mean, like a year ago, which the point was they were going to try to regime change Honduras, and Prospera knew that, which is why they were just waiting for the transition of power. And they did, and they got it. And now they don't have to leave. Do you think the lawsuit's going to continue against Honduras? No, because now the people they want are in power. So they're going to just continue their colonial project that absorbs more of Venezuela or Honduras, and the president won't matter, but doesn't care because he's not there to care. He's there to follow orders. Here's the overlapping point I made in the beginning. Jenny Cohen writes, in 2019, Mark Lutter, whose nonprofit received lots of money from Peter Thiel's backed Emergent Ventures in 2018, said, quote, we're putting out a white paper looking at Venezuela, assuming this transfer of power goes through. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? So they waited out and see if they can get in control, and they do. Oh, good, we got it. We got what we wanted. It says, and if you can get charter cities to be a part of the conversation. Here's the actual article. Mark letter on trying to end poverty by founding well-governed charter cities, freedom cities, smart cities. It's all the same conversation. And what this is about is waiting to see if they can make one of these, or rather turn Venezuela into this, like they're going to be doing with Gaza, hopefully not, like they said they're going to roll out in the United States, like they're doing in Honduras, like they're doing in El Salvador, like they're doing in the ocean, like they're doing all over the world. I almost cussed for some reason right there, but it's crazy to me. All over the world, guys. And that's why I included that. I'll show you right now in case you didn't see the beginning. This article, more than most, I think is important. The show, I don't always do that, because it outlines specifically the funding arm. Pronomos Capital. That's Peter Thiel, that's Andreessen, and that is the funding mechanism through almost entirely these mass, like Praxia and Prospera. These are fake libertarian cities that are absolutely about, like I just said right here, the rapid transition to a techno-feudal state. One guy calls it tech Zionism. I mean, they're not even hiding this in most cases, doing alarming biological experiments with no regulation. I mean, they're doing, the gain of functions, all the stuff that you Republicans rightly were fighting. And now this is being spearheaded by your team. It's alarming. I just want to point out, and then she goes on to more. I'm going to do more. I'm going to dive into this much more. Might even do an entire focus on it. But as always, it's important because she sources it and she gives you the data to look for yourself. Very well, by the way. And this is important. Now, look, like I said in the beginning, whether or not this is a byproduct, maybe all of it is. Maybe this is all really about Trump's agenda or what Israel wants, and that the Peter Thiel verse and all the rest just go, hey, we can capitalize on this. Give us Greenland. But they already had a plan for that, right? But it's also possible that that is the driving force. Like, as the timeline shows, Peter Thiel said, hey, I want Greenland for a charter city. And suddenly Trump starts caring about Greenland. Now, there could be more I don't see, but that seems to be the timeline I can prove. In this case, who knows whether this is the driving force? Something tells me there's more to it. There's a lot to point to. Either way, you've got them in the wings going, perfect. Let's get this transition done, and we're going to seize this for a charter city. I'm telling you guys, this is the transition. It's all over. As I think one of them I wrote was, let me see if I can grab that one. Yeah, this is the title frames exactly what I think is happening. And as I made the point earlier about denying the Zionist global, these are not buzzwords. These are not broad. You could specifically verify and prove what these mean. And you can then compare that to what they're doing. Trump and the Zionist globalist technocrats are building your new society, whether you like it or not. I very much believe that. So last to finish off here, let's not forget, as the squirrel points out, in 2002, and you know what's funny? You guys, longtime supporters, probably remember this. I forget I think it was Bolton and Trump in the last administration around Venezuela. But I made the argument to people, or rather the statement, that the U.S. government had been doing this a lot. Bolton has now basically admitted that in his books, by the way, or just on TV shows, which is a crime that he's done it. And it's funny he admits to it. But that they had actually successfully regime changed Venezuela before in regard to Chavez. Even what happened was they removed him, and the people like we're seeing kind of right now, rose up, marched to the streets, and were just so powerfully pushing back, they just let him go. Or maybe there's more to it that I don't see, but that's ultimately what happened. He went back to power. And so what shows you is, one, my point was I brought that up. That's not true. They never did that. And yeah, they really did. You can easily prove it. But what's interesting is that two things. That one, yes, they've been trying to do this for a long time, not because evil dictator monster, but because they want to control. On top of that, look what powerful popular support can do. In 2002, the U.S. regime orchestrated a coup in Venezuela, and Chavez was kidnapped, like we just saw with Maduro, and taken away by helicopter to be executed by CIA-Mossad agents. CIA-Mossad agents. But the Venezuelan masses came out in the streets, demanding their president, and quickly overthrew the fascist coup regime and forced Chavez to return, or his return. This was all captured by the brilliant documentary, The Revolution Will Not Be Televised. It's worth watching. And this is also, Matt Kennard backs this up too. Here's even The Guardian. Venezuela coup linked to Bush team. He simply says, Bush admin engineered a coup, 2002. Chavez was taken hostage, flown to inland for 2 days. It was reversed because the people fought back. The U.S. has been at war with Venezuela since 1999 because it slipped the imperial leash. No greater crime in Washington. Exactly. You listening out there, Venezuela, or anywhere else, Iran, stand up. I'm never calling for violence. The point is, the reality, if you stand up in numbers, it does make a difference. Aaron Rapport points out Trump on Mexico. All right, so as we're ending here, you think it's about Iran? No, just Venezuela? No, there's a global picture here. Immediately, they haven't even succeeded in what they're doing yet, and they're already pointing elsewhere. And what do you think is guiding that, guys? Who else do you see doing that? You could ask a question. I mean, I think you know exactly. There's plenty of factors out there. I mean, even Rubio, for example, his entire life has been talking about Cuba and a lot of different locations. It's Bolton doing the same. Trump on Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum, who, by the way, in a lot of ways has been more amenable to Trump, but pushed back on the GMO discussion and plenty of other things. He says the cartels are running Mexico. You know, the cartels the DEA just got caught working with, but no big deal. She's not running Mexico. We could be politically correct and be nice and say, oh, yes, she is. That's not politically correct. Why would it be politically correct to argue that she's running something when she's not? Like, it's just everything they do is about trying to make it feel like, oh, that's woke Democrat stuff. And it seems to be failing. But he says, no, she's very frightened of the cartels. They're running Mexico, which is not even untrue, by the way. But you have to understand the Israeli-U.S. involvement in that, which is not pretty easy to prove. I've gone over it myself. And I've asked her a number of times, would you like us to take out the cartels? Something's going to have to be done with Mexico. And there we go. Maybe because that's the technate that they want you to understand. Even though Jones and the rest would never tell you that, despite telling you that was going to happen years ago and now ignoring it when it starts to happen. Greenland, Mexico, all of it. Well, here's Rubio to Cuba, all simultaneously. I'd be concerned after U.S. military arrests Venezuelan leader. Cuba, you're next. And these are legitimate arguments. These are belligerent pirates. Kerry Lake. This is on the 3rd. This is today. Just happened. Free the people of Iran. Free the people of Cuba. Free the people of Venezuela. Free the people. My God. Tim says U.S. imperialist while trying to enslave the world. It's insane. DD Geopolitics points to an Israeli. Eddie Cohen. We've talked about him before. When Tehran falls, Doha will fall with it. You know, Qatar, the group that Israel has worked through for a long time. But clearly this is about taking whatever, this is a larger agenda. And it's not just greater Israel. As he says, they don't want Iran. They want the whole pie. They keep making these statements about way more than just Qatar, way more than just larger parts of greater Israel, which involves most of the Middle East. Patriotic blonde, who at one point was a pretty strong Trump supporter, and she's recognized over this time that he is not what she thought. And she's been very clear about that. She says, well, this aged well, aged like ice. She says, remember when they tried to sell us this? GOP, vote the pro-peace ticket. Vote Trump and Vance. The pro-peace ticket. Yeah, that didn't work out well, did it? It's okay to be fooled, guys. We all get fooled. What's important is to move forward honestly. Acknowledge it's not what you were told and call it out and stand by your principles. It's not that difficult. Now, I'm going to end with a great point by Kit Knightley from Off Guardian. He said, this is his article from today. Let's talk about the U.S. invasion of Venezuela and the capture of Maduro. Now, it's not that long. He makes some quick points in the beginning, which you should read just about, what happened and how it went down. But his point is, it's a ridiculous story. But we live in ridiculous times. He says in terms of reaction, the predictable people from each side are having their pre-programmed reactions. So this is my point about how what a breath of fresh air it is to actually talk and engage intelligently with people that see the larger game, the left-right paradigm, and don't just only go, the Democrats are the only thing, or Republicans are all Nazis, like you guys are all children. And he continues, there's going to be a lot of talk about sovereignty and the greater good in the next few weeks. He says, but I can't help but feel this is just another story designed to set a meta narrative. The U.S. is going to heel, his opinion, his prediction, is going to heel turn and take down the notion of national interests, which, the very point of nationalism, right? And he goes, and old-fashioned individualism in the process. Since it's about oil, we'll be told this is one more reason to focus on renewable energy and that climate change is making warfare more likely and is thus an international security emergency. Now, that may sound insane to people who only listen to what they tell you, what they say they want to do. What did I just tell you about first of all, about the USAID contracts? I can show you right now for climate change related things all over the world. I've shown you at least 2 or 3 of them. No, it never gets any traction because nobody wants to believe it. It's about the narrative. It's not about climate change. I don't think any of them care about what it's all about, using the terms to get to certain places geostrategically, plenty of stuff. But also the Stardust Solutions point, right? What was I telling you? That you could prove that Israeli company that's pretending to be an American company in Delaware, even though everyone's Israeli, they work in Israel, R&D's in Israel, but they registered in Delaware, so it's all good. It's not a joke, by the way. You can look it up. I did a whole show on it. The point is that they're doing this to fight climate change and holding the world hostage once they get it done because they can never stop because it'll kill the world. That's basically what they're saying. They're lobbying Trump's administration. When they wrote their deck and they put it out to everyone, they literally put an American flag next to the funding. They're telling you they're doing this. Bill Gates is petitioning this. He's in Trump's ear. I believe, I hope I'm wrong, that they're going to find a way to turn that into something that somehow Republicans want, or at least just bull rush it in and tell you you're not Republican if you don't support the agenda like they've done so far. He's simply arguing that this may turn into that direction. And he says people who die in climate or energy conflicts will be added to the climate-related death statistics. He says, and you know what would stop things like this from happening? Global government. What do you guys think? No, it's just a thought. Maybe it's too much, right? The idea is that whether it's just global government, which I doubt they'll say it like that, or just the equivalent in some kind of Republican-friendly framing. I believe that's where this goes. And I believe that's what it's always kind of been. I called this out in January 13th of 2025. The fake globalist resistance ushering in the globalist plan. It's clear as day to me. Now, don't take my word for it. Look, watch the show, engage with the information, and look up what the word globalist means, not what Alex Jones says, what it means, what the definition is, and then compare that to what these people are doing. I don't think you'll be shocked. It's obviously the same thing. And maybe they don't know that. At the end of the day, though, all of this, I think, is standing out pretty clearly that this is corrupt. I mean, these are criminals. What they're doing is criminal. And I think they know that. So why do they keep doing this in your face while they're telling you they're doing something else? Why are they gaslighting you constantly? I believe they're not really in control. But all of this is for you to decide, or rather decide for yourselves. Just look at the data, break this stuff down for yourself, and be critical, guys. It's never been more clear. Thank you for being here. You know, you guys help me feel sane. So hopefully I do the same for you, to realize that most people, or at least enough people, are not this blind, are not this willfully dishonest with themselves and people around them. So thank you for supporting this platform. Thank you for continuing to fight for the truth. I love you all. As always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.